blade of Gilliman cut through the warp like a knife through corrupted flesh, which, given the nature of the immaterium, was a disturbingly literal comparison. Duke stood in the observation gallery, watching impossible colors swirl beyond the Geller field that kept the ship's interior anchored in something resembling normal reality. The field itself was visible as a faint shimmer, the only thing separating the crew from an ocean of madness that wanted very badly to get inside. "You should not watch the warp directly," Brother Castus advised, his power armor's servos humming as he joined Duke at the viewport. The Ultramarine had been assigned as Duke's liaison for the journey, part honor guard, part observer, and probably part executioner if Duke did anything the chapter deemed unacceptable. Even through shielding, prolonged exposure can affect baseline humans. "Yeah, I've noticed," Duke said. His enhanced nervous system was filtering out psychic pressure that made his teeth ache and his vision occasionally blur at the edges. It's like staring at a migraine that's also trying to eat your soul. Fun times. The journey from Cadia to Stygiza Eep should have taken 3 weeks of warp transit, subjectively anyway. Time worked differently in the Immaterium, and Duke had been warned that the ship might arrive before it left, after everyone aboard had died of old age, or exactly when expected. Warp travel was, he'd learned, the 41st millennium's answer to playing Russian roulette with physics itself. They were 2 weeks into the transit when the ship's alarms began screaming. Duke's combat instincts activated before his conscious mind processed the threat. His hand went to his Devastator, checking the weapon's charge, while his tactical HUD began parsing the alert codes blaring over the Vox system. Geller field fluctuation, Castus translated, his helmet's optics glowing brighter as combat protocols engaged. Sector 7, decks 12 through 15, all hands to battle stations, possible warp breach imminent. Possible? Duke asked, already moving toward the armory where he'd stowed his full loadout. "The warp is never certain," Castus replied, his massive armored form keeping pace easily. "We may face demons, reality distortions, temporal anomalies, or nothing at all. The Immaterium plays by its own rules." They reached the armory as the ship lurched. Not physically, but in some direction that didn't exist in normal space. Duke's stomach twisted, his augmented physiology struggling to process sensory input that violated several fundamental laws of biology. Around them, the corridor's lighting flickered, and for just a moment, Duke could swear he saw faces in the walls. Screaming, pleading, laughing faces made of metal and flesh fused together. Then the faces were gone, and the lighting stabilized. "That was a minor incursion," Castus said grimly. "The major one is coming." Duke armed himself with practiced efficiency. Devastator on back mount, RPG on shoulder harness, shotgun at hip, freeze thrower, and pipe bombs on utility belt. His repaired shrinker ray, Kern's parting gift, restored to functionality through months of painstaking work, went into its specialized holster. The weapon hummed with barely contained power, eager to be used. The Vox crackled with Brother Sergeant Gaius's voice, calm despite the crisis. "All combat units to Sector 7. We have confirmed warp breach, hostiles emerging, identify as Chaos boarding party, 1,000 Suns, traitor Marines, approximately 20 contacts, accompanied by demon manifestations. Kill Team Alpha, you have point. Duke Nukem, remain with Brother Castus in reserve position." "Yeah, about that," Duke said over the Vox, already heading towards Sector 7 at a jog. "I don't really do reserve position. More of a find the biggest problem and shoot it kind of guy." Gaius's response carried the weight of someone who'd expected exactly this. "Then coordinate with Kill Team Alpha. But remember, you are aboard an Ultramarines vessel. We fight with discipline and tactics, not reckless heroics." "I can do discipline and tactics," Duke protested. "I just also do them while making it look cool." They reached Sector 7 to find controlled chaos, the Ultramarines kind, where everything was on fire, but according to precise strategic doctrine. A hole had been torn in reality itself, a wound in the ship's hull that bled impossible light and geometries that hurt to perceive directly. Through it poured Chaos Marines in ornate armor covered with arcane symbols and eye-watering color schemes. But these weren't the berserk world eaters or theatrical emperor's children. These moved with eerie precision, their armor crackling with psychic energy, their weapons firing bolts of pure warp stuff that ignored conventional defenses. Thousand Suns, the traitor legion of sorcerers, warriors whose bodies were dust animated by ancient spells, whose minds had survived 10,000 years of damnation through mastery of forbidden knowledge. Rubricae, Castus identified, his bolter already tracking targets. Soulless automatons, their bodies turned to ash by an ancient curse. They feel no fear, no pain, no doubt. Only the sorcerers commanding them have true awareness. Duke raised his devastator. So shoot the wizards. Got it. The rotary cannons spun up with their familiar mechanical roar, and Duke opened fire on a Thousand Suns sorcerer who'd been preparing some kind of reality warping spell. The explosive rounds hammered into the traitor's armor, and for a moment, Duke thought he'd scored a kill. Then the sorcerer's form flickered, and the bullets passed harmlessly through what was apparently an illusion. The real sorcerer appeared 3 meters to the left, staff raised, and unleashed a bolt of warp fire that should have reduced Duke to ash. Duke's jetpack activated reflexively, carrying him sideways in a burst of thrust that sent him rolling across the deck. The warp fire struck where he'd been standing, melting the metal floor into slag that bubbled with unnatural heat. "They can teleport," Duke shouted, coming up firing. "Nobody mentioned the wizard terrorists could teleport." "The Thousand Suns are masters of the warp," Gaius replied over the Vox, his own power sword cleaving through a Rubricae's torso. The animated armor collapsed, ash spilling from the bisected suite. "Conventional tactics are insufficient. Target the sorcerers specifically. Without them, the Rubricae are mindless." Duke scanned the battlefield with his tactical hooder, identifying 3 sorcerers directing the boarding party. 2 were maintaining the warp breach, keeping it open for reinforcements. The 3rd was coordinating the Rubricae assault, directing his dust warriors with gestures that sent them flowing across the deck like a tide of ancient vengeance. "Castus," Duke said, "I need you to keep the dust robots busy. I'm going for the head wizard." "That is tactically unsound," Castus objected, even as his bolter dropped another Rubricae. "You are not equipped for psychic combat." "Watch me," Duke said, and activated his Hollow Duke. The hard-light decoy appeared, drawing the coordinating sorcerer's attention. The traitor raised his staff, prepared to blast what he thought was Duke, and left himself open for exactly 2 seconds. Duke, invisible and sprinting, closed the distance with speed that would have made Olympic athletes weep. His shotgun came up, aimed at the sorcerer's helmet at point-blank range, and he fired both barrels simultaneously. The sorcerer's head exploded, or tried to. Instead of normal biological matter, crystallized psychic energy shattered like glass, and the body began collapsing into ash that screamed with 10,000-year-old agony. The Rubricae under that sorcerer's command froze mid-motion, suddenly directionless. The Ultramarines capitalized immediately, bolter fire reducing the immobilized dust warriors to scattered armor pieces. "One down," Duke reported, reloading his shotgun with shells that probably shouldn't work, but did anyway through sheer force of his universe's superior physics. 2 to go. The remaining sorcerers noticed their companion's demise and adjusted their tactics. The 2 maintaining the warp breach began chanting in unison, and the wound in reality pulsed, growing larger. Something massive was trying to push through, something that made the ship's hull groan and reality itself flinch away. "They are summoning a demon," Gaius warned. "Greater manifestation, possibly a Lord of Change. If it emerges fully, this ship is lost." Duke assessed the tactical situation. The warp breach was 20 meters away, surrounded by a dozen rubricae and protected by 2 sorcerers actively channeling. The breach itself was expanding, tendrils of impossible energy reaching out to anchor more of whatever nightmare was trying to claw its way into reality. Standard assault would take too long. The demon would manifest before they could fight through the rubricae screen. Time for unconventional tactics. Duke pulled every pipe bomb from his harness, 6 of them, his entire remaining supply. He armed them all, set the timers for simultaneous detonation, and looked at Castus. "I'm gonna need you to throw me," Duke said. Castus's helmet turned toward him. "Throw you?" "At the breach, as hard as you can. I'll handle the rest." "That is insane," Castus stated. "The warp energies will tear you apart. The blast will kill the sorcerers and collapse the breach before the demon gets through," Duke finished. "Trust me, I've done stupider things. Remember that time I flew into an alien mothership's reactor core? This is basically that, but with more demons." For a long moment, Castus didn't move. Then the Ultramarine grabbed Duke by the back of his armor harness, servos in his power armor whining with effort. "The Emperor protects," Castus said. "And apparently, so do insane warriors from the Dark Age." He threw Duke like a missile. Duke sailed over the rubricae lines, jetpack engaging mid-flight to stabilize and add velocity. He could see the warp breach clearly now, could see the massive taloned hand trying to force its way through, could see the sorcerers' concentration as they poured their power into widening the gap, could see the exact moment they realized what was about to happen. He released all 6 pipe bombs directly into the breach, letting them tumble into the swirling vortex of unreality. Then he engaged maximum thrust on his jetpack, reversing his trajectory and rocketing back toward the Ultramarine lines. The sorcerers tried to stop the detonation, tried to unmake the bombs with warp sorcery, tried to teleport them away, tried to shield themselves with psychic barriers. They had exactly 1.3 seconds to make the attempt. The bombs exploded simultaneously, and for one perfect moment, Duke's mundane chemistry-based explosives met the fundamental forces of chaos in direct confrontation. Physics won. The warp breach collapsed like a punctured lung. The demon's hand was severed at the wrist, its screams echoing across dimensions, and the 2 sorcerers were caught in the blast that vaporized both them and a significant chunk of the ship's hull. Duke landed in a roll, skidding across the deck as emergency bulkheads slammed down to seal the new holes in the ship. Around him, the remaining rubricae collapsed into lifeless armor and ash, their animating sorcery severed. Silence fell across Sector 7, broken only by the crackle of fires and the hiss of escaping atmosphere being contained by emergency systems. Gaius approached, his power armor showing scorch marks from the battle. "You collapsed a warp breach with conventional explosives. You severed a greater demon's manifestation before it could fully emerge. You destroyed 2,000 Sun sorcerers in one attack." His tone was absolutely unreadable. That was either the most tactically brilliant or most recklessly suicidal maneuver I have witnessed in 2 centuries of warfare. Duke stood, brushing ash and corrupted metal fragments from his armor. "I'm gonna go with brilliant since I'm still alive." He surveyed the damage to Sector 7. "Though your ship's gonna need some repairs. Sorry about the extra holes." "The Omnissiah's tech priests will handle repairs," Gaius replied. "What concerns me is how easily you adapted to fighting psychic opponents. The 1,000 Suns are among the most dangerous traitor legions precisely because their sorcery bypasses conventional defenses. Yet you countered them with timing, misdirection, and explosive ordnance." "Where I come from, we had a saying," Duke said, reloading his weapons with ammunition that shouldn't still exist after that expenditure, but somehow did. "Any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from a good excuse to blow something up." Or something like that. I might be misremembering. Castus joined them, his armor's diagnostics showing moderate damage from rubricae fire. "The warp breach is sealed. No further hostiles detected." Geller, field integrity restored to acceptable parameters. He looked at Duke. You threw yourself at a demon manifestation armed with nothing but explosives and confidence. Yeah, Duke confirmed. It's kind of my thing. I'm beginning to understand, Castus said slowly, why the Cadian regiments call you the Angel of Defiance. You do not fight like Imperial soldiers who accept death as inevitable. You fight as if losing is simply not an option you acknowledge. That's because it isn't, Duke replied. I didn't save Earth a dozen times by accepting failure. I saved it by refusing to quit until the bad guys were dead and the day was won. He grinned. Same applies here. Chaos wants to board this ship? They can try, but they're gonna learn what every alien invasion force learned back home. Duke Nukem doesn't lose. As the Ultramarines began securing the sector and tending to their wounded, 2 battle brothers injured, none killed, acceptable casualties by their grim standards, Duke found himself thinking about the demon's hand. That moment when it had tried to force through the breach, when reality itself had screamed at its presence. He'd fought aliens, mutants, cyborgs, and dimensional horrors. But demons were different. They weren't just hostile entities from another dimension. They were concepts given form, emotions weaponized, humanity's darkness reflected back with teeth and claws, and he'd just proven they could be killed with enough explosives in the right place. Not so scary after all, Duke muttered. Just another type of alien that needs killing. The Vox crackled with a new voice. The ship's navigator, the mutant psyker responsible for steering through the warp. All hands, be advised. We are accelerating transit to Stygies 8. The warp breach has attracted attention. Multiple entities are tracking our passage. We will arrive ahead of schedule, but the journey will be difficult. How difficult? Gaius asked. The navigator's response was tinged with genuine fear. The kind where I recommend everyone pray to the Emperor and prepare for additional boarding actions. Whatever Duke Nukem is, whatever technology he carries, the warp has noticed, and it wants him. Duke checked his remaining ammunition, assessed his weapon status, and cracked his knuckles with the casual ease of someone preparing for round 2. Let it come, he said. I've got plenty of bullets and a really bad attitude, and I've learned something important about this universe. What's that? Castus asked. Duke's grin was sharp enough to cut. Everything bleeds if you hit it hard enough. Even demons. Stygies' fate didn't look like a planet so much as a factory that had metastasized into a celestial body. From orbit, Duke watched through the blade of Guilliman's viewports as the Forge world rotated beneath them. A sphere wrapped in industrial sprawl, its surface covered in manufactorums, refineries, and forges that burned with heat intense enough to turn the upper atmosphere into a perpetual orange haze. Massive orbital tethers connected surface installations to space stations the size of small moons, creating a web of industry that made Duke's Earth look positively pastoral by comparison. Stygies 8 is a frontier Forge world. Magos Kern's voice crackled over long-range Vox, transmitted from Cadia. They specialize in Xenos tech research, officially forbidden, unofficially tolerated because the Imperium needs their xenoarchaeology expertise. They are flexible in their interpretation of Mechanicus doctrine. So they're the tech priests who actually experiment instead of just praying at old machines? Duke asked. Precisely, which is why I arranged your introduction to Archmagus Hephaestion. He is brilliant, heretical by orthodox standards, and pragmatic enough to see your value, rather than simply declaring you tech heresy. Kern paused. However, not all factions on Stygies 8 share his vision. Be prepared for resistance. The Ultramarines' Thunderhawk descended through atmosphere that tasted like burning metal and recycled prayers. Duke watched the landscape resolve from abstract industrial sprawl into specific nightmares. Forge cathedrals, kilometers tall, lakes of molten metal that fed production lines stretching to the horizon, and armies of servitors, those lobotomized cyborg slaves, working in conditions that would have violated every safety regulation Duke's Earth had ever conceived. "This is wrong," Duke said quietly, watching a servitor's arm get caught in machinery. The cyborg didn't scream, couldn't scream, its vocal cords long since removed, just kept trying to work until supervisors noticed and discarded the damaged unit like broken equipment. Gaius followed Duke's gaze. Servitors are criminals, heretics, or vat-grown biological components. Their humanity is forfeit. They serve the Omnissiah in the only way their failures permit. Their people, Duke countered, lobotomized, mutilated people turned into living machines because your Imperium thinks that's an acceptable solution to labor shortages. "What would you have us do?" Gaius asked. "The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. We need servitors to maintain infrastructure, operate machinery, perform tasks too dangerous or demeaning for full humans. Without them, Forge worlds like this would cease functioning." Duke had no good answer. He'd fought for humanity countless times, but he'd never had to manage a galaxy-spanning civilization on the edge of collapse. Maybe servitors were necessary evil. Maybe the 41st millennium's brutality was the only thing keeping humanity alive. Or maybe that was just what they told themselves to justify the horrors. The Thunderhawk landed in a receiving bay that could have accommodated a dozen aircraft, currently occupied by tech priest delegations whose very presence radiated hostility. Duke recognized factional conflict when he saw it. These weren't just different groups, they were opposed camps, barely maintaining civility. Archmagos Hephaestion stood at the bay's center, a figure who'd replaced so much of his body with machinery that determining his original species required faith. His form was built vertically, over 9 feet tall, all skeletal chrome and pulsing data cables, with a head that was more sensor array than school. Mechadendrites extended from his back in a peacock display of technological augmentation. Duke Nukem, Hephaestion's voice came from speakers embedded in his chest, synthesized but carrying genuine warmth. The warrior who understands Dark Age principles. Magos Kern has transmitted extensive documentation of your methodologies. I am eager to collaborate on the Dimensional Anchor project. To Hephaestion's left stood a delegation of tech priests in red robes embroidered with orthodox iconography. Their leader, a hunched figure whose augmentations looked deliberately crude as if rejecting excessive modification, stepped forward. Archmagos Hephaestion speaks without authority, the figure declared, voice crackling through damaged Vox grills. I am Magos Dominus Radek of the Orthodox congregation. We reject this individual's presence on Styges the Eighth. He represents tech heresy, deviation from the Omnissiah's teachings, and dangerous contamination of sacred knowledge with profane understanding. Duke raised an eyebrow. I'm standing right here. You could address me directly instead of talking about me like I'm a piece of controversial equipment. Radek's optics focused on Duke with palpable disgust. You are worse than equipment. You are a thinking being who possesses knowledge that should have died with the Dark Age. Every moment you exist, you prove the cult Mechanicus has failed, that the machine god's mysteries are not divine revelation but simply forgotten science. Yeah, Duke confirmed. That's pretty much accurate. Your machine god is just a fancy name for things we used to understand before we forgot how. No offense. The Orthodox congregation made sounds like multiple computers crashing simultaneously. Several tech priests clutched at their robes as if Duke had physically struck them. Hephaestion's mechadendrites gestured with what might have been amusement. As you can see, Duke Nukem, your presence is divisive. The Orthodox congregation believes maintaining faith requires preserving ignorance. My faction believes the Omnissiah wants us to understand his works, not merely worship them. And the third faction? Duke asked, noting another group of tech priests who'd remained silent, watching with calculating optics. A new voice spoke. Female, filtered through Vox synthesizers, but retaining human inflection. The Seekers of the Sovereign Circuit acknowledge both positions have merit. A tech priest emerged from the third group, her augmentations balanced between Hephaestion's excessive modification and Radek's orthodox restraint. I am Magos Explorator Thalassa. We believe Duke Nukem should be studied, his knowledge extracted, and then preserved for posterity. Duke's hand didn't move toward his weapons, but his posture shifted subtly. When you say preserved, you mean killed and dissected, don't you? Efficiently analyzed, Thalassa corrected. Your biological augmentations are unique. Your neural patterns contain Dark Age knowledge. Your very existence is a resource too valuable to waste on temporary cooperation. Her optics gleamed. We would ensure your legacy serves the Omnissiah for millennia. Is that not preferable to your current path toward oblivion? Hard pass, Duke said flatly. I like my brain inside my skull and my knowledge used by me, not downloaded by tech priests who want to turn me into a biological database. Gaius stepped forward, his power armor's presence imposing immediate authority. Duke Nukem travels under Ultramarine's protection. Any attempt to harm him will be considered an attack on the chapter itself. His tone carried the weight of 2 centuries of enforcement. Are we clear, Magos Explorator? Thalassa's mechadendrites retracted slightly, a submissive gesture. The Adeptus Astartes speak with authority. We will not act without proper authorization. Her tone suggested she was already calculating how to obtain such authorization. Archmagos Hephaestion glided forward on tracks, positioning himself between the factions. Enough. Duke Nukem is here to collaborate on dimensional research, not to become a theological debate or a dissection specimen. My authority on Stygi's Sate supersedes factional concerns. He turned to Duke. However, I must be honest. My authority is contested. The Orthodox congregation seeks my removal. The Seekers operate with increasing autonomy, and somewhere in this Forge world's depths there are other factions with their own agendas. Sounds like a complicated political situation, Duke observed. What happens if you get removed? Then the Orthodox congregation takes control, declares your presence tech heresy, and petitions the Inquisition for your immediate execution, Hephaestion stated matter-of-factly. Or the Seekers gain sufficient influence to obtain authorization for your preservation, or the other factions make their moves. His optics brightened. Politics on Forge worlds are as dangerous as battlefields, sometimes more so. Duke looked at Gaius. You knew this was going to be complicated. Lord Castellan Creed warned me, Gaius confirmed. But Stygi's Wait remains the only Forge world with the expertise and resources for your dimensional anchor project. The alternative is abandoning your goal of returning home. Duke considered his options. He could leave, find another Forge world, start over with new tech priests who might have different but equally problematic agendas. Or he could stay, navigate this nightmare of Mechanicus politics, and work toward actually getting home. All right, Duke said to Hephaestion. I'll work with you, but we're setting ground rules. 1. Nobody tries to dissect me, download my brain, or preserve me for posterity. 2. I teach willing students only. No forced knowledge extraction. 3. If this gets too dangerous or too crazy, I'm out, and your factions can fight over who gets to be disappointed. Hephaestion's mechadendrites performed a gesture that might have been agreement. Acceptable. In return, you will have access to our laboratories, xenoarchaeology archives, and the most advanced dimensional research facilities in the segmentum. Together, we will build your anchor. Magos Dominus Radek's Vox grills emitted static that sounded suspiciously like disgust. This collaboration is heresy. The Orthodox congregation will not stand idle while you corrupt the Omnissiah's works with profane knowledge. Then stand aside or stand in my way, Duke replied. But if you choose option 2, you're going to find out what Dark Age humanity did to obstacles. The Orthodox congregation retreated. their body language radiating hostility. Thalassa and the Seekers lingered, optics recording every detail of Duke's appearance, weapons, and equipment. Finally, they too withdrew, leaving Duke with Hephaestion, Gaius, and the growing certainty that this Forge world was going to be more dangerous than any battlefield. As they moved deeper into Steigi's Outha's industrial heart, through corridors that hummed with arcane machinery and smelled of burning incense mixed with ozone, Duke caught glimpses of the Forge world's true nature. Servitors working until their bodies failed. Tech priests performing rituals that were just maintenance procedures wrapped in theological window dressing. And everywhere, the sense that knowledge was being hoarded, controlled, weaponized. "This place is a nightmare," Duke muttered. "This place is the Imperium," Gaius corrected. "Brutal, inefficient, barely functional, but still standing after 10,000 years. Sometimes I wonder if that counts as success, or merely prolonged failure." Hephaestion led them to a laboratory that looked like a cathedral had mated with a particle accelerator and given birth to something that violated zoning laws in 3 dimensions. At its center stood the framework for Duke's dimensional anchor, a massive construct of crystalline matrices, power conduits, and components that Duke's engineering knowledge struggled to classify. "We have been working from Magos Kern's transmissions and our own xenoarchaeology research," Hephaestion explained. "The principles are theoretically sound, but implementation requires expertise we lack. Your expertise." Duke approached. The anchor, his tactical HUD scanning its structure. The engineering was sophisticated but flawed. They'd understood the theory, but missed crucial practical applications. "You've got the power generation right, but your dimensional resonance calibration is off by about 15%. At this frequency, you wouldn't punch through to my universe. You'd tear a hole into the warp." "The warp is accessible via multiple methodologies," Hephaestion said. "We assumed dimensional travel would utilize similar principles." "That's your first mistake," Duke replied, pulling out tools from his equipment harness. "The warp is emotional space. It responds to consciousness, belief, psychic energy. Normal dimensional travel works through quantum entanglement and exploiting universal constants. Totally different physics." He began making adjustments, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who'd built and repaired technology that the 41st millennium would consider miraculous. Hephaestion watched with optics at maximum magnification, recording every movement, every calculation, every casual demonstration of expertise that the Mechanicus had forgotten millennia ago. "Magos Kern was correct," Hephaestion said quietly. "You do not simply operate technology. You understand it, create it, improve it." His mechadendrites gestured with something like reverence. This is what the Omnissiah wanted for his children. Not blind faith, but comprehension. Not worship, but mastery. "Glad somebody gets it," Duke said, rewiring a power conduit that had been installed backward. "Now, how long until your Orthodox buddies try to sabotage this project?" "Radek is predictable," Hephaestion replied. "He will petition the Fabricator General on Mars, seek formal censure, attempt to build political coalition against my authority. This will take weeks, possibly months. By then, we should have made sufficient progress." "And the Seekers?" Thalassa didn't strike me as the patient type. Hephaestion's pause was meaningful. "Magos Explorator Thalassa is ambitious. She seeks the Archmago's position for herself. If she can prove I've failed to properly exploit your presence, if she can demonstrate that your knowledge would be better utilized through preservation, she may gain support from neutral factions." Duke stopped working, turning to face the Archmagus directly. "So basically, I'm standing in a laboratory, surrounded by people who want to either kill me, worship me, or dissect me. And I'm supposed to build a universe-hopping machine while navigating all that?" "Yes," Hephaestion confirmed. "Welcome to Forge World politics. It is, as you would say, A complete shit show. Duke blinked. Did you just curse? I didn't know tech priests knew how to curse. I have been studying Cadian military Vox transmissions, Hephaestion explained. Your influence has spread across multiple guard regiments. Their vocabulary has become colorful. I find the efficiency of profanity in conveying emotional intensity to be worthy of analysis. Despite everything, the political nightmare, the dissection threats, the Byzantine Mechanicus factions, Duke laughed. It was genuine, surprised laughter, the kind that only came from encountering something so absurdly unexpected that the universe's grimness cracked for just a moment. All right, Hephaestion, Duke said. You've officially earned my respect. Any tech priest who learns to swear from Guard Vox channels is someone I can work with. Gaius, watching this exchange with the patience of someone who'd survived 2 centuries of worse, activated his Vox. Brother Sergeant Gaius to Ultramarines Kill Team. Establish perimeter security around the laboratory complex. Authorization level Maximus. Nobody enters or exits without my direct clearance. Expecting trouble? Duke asked. Always, Gaius replied. This is Warhammer 40,000. Trouble is the default state of existence. Duke returned to the dimensional anchor, hands already making the intricate adjustments needed to transform theoretical framework into functional device. Behind him, Mechanicus factions plotted their moves. Above him, the Forge world's endless production ground forward, and somewhere in the depths of Styges the Eighth, other forces stirred, forces that had noticed Duke's presence and saw opportunities that even the tech priests hadn't conceived. But for now, in this moment, Duke Nukem did what he'd always done. Focused on the mission, trusted his skills, and prepared to handle whatever fresh hell the universe threw at him next. Just another Tuesday, he muttered, rewiring reality anchoring components. Just another crazy, demon-haunted, politically complicated Tuesday. The Inquisitor arrived on Styges 8 without announcement, fanfare, or warning, which was precisely how Inquisitors preferred to operate. Duke learned about the visit when Gaius's Vox crackled with urgent warning. Inquisitorial shuttle inbound. Single passenger, transmitting Ordo Xanos credentials and demanding immediate audience with Duke Nukem. Duke looked up from the dimensional anchor, where he'd been explaining quantum entanglement principles to a group of tech priests who'd been brave or curious enough to openly study with him. Let me guess, this is either going to be someone trying to recruit me or someone trying to execute me. With the Inquisition, Gaius replied. It is frequently both simultaneously. The Inquisitor swept into the laboratory 15 minutes later, and Duke immediately recognized trouble. She wore armor that combined inquisitorial rosettes with Xeno's design elements that would have gotten most Imperial citizens burned as heretics. Sleek, organic curves mixed with human craftsmanship, weapons that incorporated technology from at least 3 different alien species. Her face was young, maybe 30s, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen horrors that aged souls faster than bodies. Duke Nukem, she said, her voice carrying authority backed by the Inquisition's absolute power. I'm Inquisitor Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos. We need to talk. Privately. Gaius stepped forward, his massive armored form interposing between Duke and the Inquisitor. Duke Nukem operates under Ultramarines protection. Any conversation will include chapter observers. Cryptman's expression didn't change. Brother Sergeant Gaius of the Ultramarines 4th Company, decorated veteran, exemplary service record, absolute loyalty to the Codex Astartes. She pulled out a data slate and tossed it to Gaius with casual disregard for protocol. Read that. It supersedes your authority, then leave. Gaius caught the slate, his helmet's optics scanning its contents. Whatever he read made his posture stiffen. This is signed by multiple Inquisitor lords and countersigned by representatives of your chapter master. It grants Inquisitor Cryptman operational authority regarding Duke Nukem, which means the Space Marine leaves, Cryptman said flatly. Now, Duke raised his hand. Hold on. I don't take orders from the Inquisition. That was part of my deal with Creed, independence in exchange for cooperation. Cryptman finally looked directly at Duke, and her expression was complex, calculating, desperate, and carrying something that might have been respect. I'm not here to give you orders. I'm here to offer you something the Imperium should never offer anyone, a choice. That got Duke's attention. I'm listening. Gaius looked between them, clearly conflicted between his duty to protect Duke and his obligation to obey inquisitorial authority. Finally, he nodded. I will establish perimeter security, but if you harm him, Inquisitor, the Ultramarines will hold you accountable. Noted, Cryptman said, utterly unintimidated. Once they were alone, relatively, given that Archmagos Hephaestion's laboratory had surveillance that would make intelligence agencies jealous, Cryptman activated a device that made the air shimmer. Privacy field. Nothing we discuss leaves this bubble. Not even to the Omnissiah's blessed sensors. Duke leaned against the dimensional anchor. So what's the pitch? You want me to join the Inquisition, become your personal Xenos killer, help you fight the good fight in morally gray ways? Yes to all three, Cryptman confirmed. But it's more complicated than that. She pulled up a hololithic display showing star charts Duke didn't recognize. The Ordo Xenos exists to study and counter alien threats to humanity. Unlike most of the Imperium, we acknowledge that some Xenos are preferable to others. The Tau are expansionist but not genocidal. The Eldar are arrogant but sometimes allied. Even Orcs are predictable threats. And Chaos? Duke asked. The Ordo Malleus handles demons. We focus on aliens. She zoomed in on a specific sector. But here's the problem. The Imperium's xenocidal doctrine is failing. We're fighting too many enemies on too many fronts. Every alien species we purge takes resources away from fighting chaos, defending against Tyranids, or holding back the Necrons. Her expression hardened. We're losing, Duke. Slowly, inevitably, losing. Duke had suspected as much from everything he'd seen, but hearing an Inquisitor admit it was startling. So what's your solution? Pragmatism over dogma, Cryptman said. The Ordo Xenos has a radical faction, my faction that believes selective alliance with Xenos is not just acceptable but necessary for humanity's survival. We've worked with Eldar Farseers, coordinated with Tau commanders, even negotiated with certain Orc warlords when it served humanity's interests. That sounds like heresy, Duke observed. It is heresy, Cryptman agreed. Absolute, undeniable heresy that would get me executed if proven to Puritan Inquisitors. But it's also effective. I've saved billions of Imperial lives through Xenos alliances that official doctrine would never permit. She met Duke's eyes. And I think you could help me save billions more. Duke considered this. The Imperium's xenophobia had struck him as counterproductive from the start. Killing every alien species on sight seemed like a good way to make universal enemies when you needed every advantage. But working with an Inquisitor who openly admitted to heresy was dangerous. Then again, when had Duke ever taken the safe option? What specifically do you want from me? He asked. Cryptman deactivated the star chart and brought up a different display, this one showing Duke's dimensional anchor. Your technology predates the Imperium. It might predate humanity's contact with most Xeno species. That makes it unique. Neither Imperial nor alien, but something from the age when humanity stood alone. She gestured at the anchor. If you successfully build this device, you prove that dimensional travel is possible without warp transit. Do you understand what that means? Duke thought about it. It means you could move ships, armies, supplies, without using the warp, without needing navigators, without risking chaos, corruption. Exactly, Cryptman confirmed. The warp is humanity's greatest vulnerability. It allows chaos to infiltrate our ships, corrupt our psychers, and strike anywhere warp routes exist. But dimensional travel, true dimensional travel based on physics instead of immaterium navigation, could change everything. So you want to steal my dimensional anchor tech, Duke said flatly. I want to collaborate with you to revolutionize human transportation, Cryptman corrected. Imagine an Imperium that can move fleets without warp exposure, that can evacuate planets without risking Geller field failures, that can establish supply lines chaos can't interdict. Her voice carried genuine passion. You could save humanity, Duke, not just fight battles or win wars, but fundamentally change our strategic situation. It was a compelling pitch. Duke had to admit that, and Cryptman seemed genuine, actually believing in what she was saying rather than just manipulating him. But Duke had learned to be suspicious of people offering world-changing opportunities. What's the catch? He asked. Cryptman smiled grimly. The catch is that doing this would require working with Xenos. The Tau have dimensional stabilization technology from their own experiments. The Eldar understand the webway, which is basically dimensional travel through constructed passages. Even some Necron tomb worlds have phase-shifting capabilities we could study. She paused. I have contacts among all three species. They would help. For a price. And that price is? Information exchange, limited technology sharing, agreements not to purge specific populations. Cryptman's expression showed she knew exactly how heretical she sounded. In other words, treating Xenos as potential partners rather than inevitable enemies, which the Imperium would execute me for suggesting. Duke walked around the dimensional anchor, thinking through the implications. Working with Cryptman meant committing deeper to the 41st Millennium's problems instead of focusing on getting home. It meant potentially making enemies of Orthodox Inquisitors, the Ecclesiarchy, and anyone else who believed the Emperor's word was absolute. But it also meant maybe, just maybe, doing something that mattered beyond winning individual battles. Let me ask you something, Duke said. If I help you with this, if we somehow revolutionize Imperial transportation and save billions of lives, what happens to me? Do I become your permanent asset? Do I lose my independence? Do I get sacrificed for the greater good when it's politically convenient? Cryptman met his gaze without flinching. Honest answer? I don't know. The Inquisition doesn't release valuable assets willingly. If you help me succeed, powerful people will want to control you. She paused. But I'll promise you this. I won't betray you first. I won't hand you over to Orthodox factions. And I'll help you get home if that's what you ultimately want, even if it means losing your expertise. Why? Duke asked. Why promise that when you could just lie and string me along? Because I've read your entire record from Cadia, Cryptman replied. You value honesty, hate manipulation, and respond to threats by shooting first and asking questions later. Lying to you would be tactically stupid. She smiled slightly. Besides, I respect what you represent. Humanity that doesn't need the Emperor to be great. That's dangerous to Imperial doctrine, but it's also inspiring. And I think the galaxy needs more inspiration, even if it's heretical. Duke made his decision. All right, I'll work with you, but on my terms. 1. I maintain independence. No inquisitorial control over my actions. 2. Any Xenos allies get vetted by me personally. I'm not walking into a trap. 3. You keep your promise about helping me get home. No strings, no conditions, no greater good excuses when it's time to follow through. Agreed, Cryptman said immediately. I'll formalize this as an inquisitorial contract. You become a sanctioned consultant to the Ordo Xenos with operational autonomy. It's irregular, but the Inquisition specializes in irregular solutions. She extended her hand. Duke gripped it sealing an alliance that would have gotten both of them executed if Orthodox factions discovered its full scope. As Kryptman deactivated the privacy field and prepared to leave, Duke asked one final question. Why me? The Imperium has countless warriors, tech priests, allies. Why specifically recruit a guy from 10,000 years in the past who just wants to go home? Kryptman paused at the laboratory's exit. Because everyone else is bound by the Imperium's chains. Duty, faith, fear, indoctrination. But you're free. You remember what humanity was before the chains. And I think that freedom, that memory of something better, is exactly what we need to find a way forward. She looked back at him. Plus, you killed a greater demon with pipe bombs. Anyone crazy enough to try that is someone I want on my side. After she left, Gaius re-entered the laboratory, his helmet's optics focused on Duke with unreadable intensity. What did she offer you? A chance to maybe save the Imperium, Duke said, and also probably a one-way ticket to being declared a heretic if things go wrong. So nothing has changed, Gaius observed. You were already one wrong move from heresy charges. Yeah, Duke agreed. But now I'm officially sanctioned to commit heresy. That's progress, right? Gaius was silent for a moment. Then, quietly, the Imperium is changing because of you. Perhaps not quickly, perhaps not obviously, but changing nonetheless. I am uncertain whether this is humanity's salvation or damnation. Duke returned to working on the dimensional anchor. Honestly, I'm not sure either. But I'd rather try to make things better and risk screwing up than not try at all. That philosophy, Gaius said, is either the most noble thing I've heard or the most dangerous heresy imaginable. Why not both? Duke suggested, calibrating a quantum resonance array. I'm good at multitasking. The Tau made first contact 3 days after Kryptman's departure, and they did it with a kind of precision that made Duke respect their military efficiency. No shooting, no posturing, no dramatic declarations. Just a single stealth-equipped shuttle that materialized in Styges AP's orbital space, transmitted credentials indicating Inquisitor Kryptman had arranged the meeting, and requested landing clearance at coordinates that corresponded exactly to the laboratory complex's receiving bay. Duke was impressed despite himself. Getting through Imperial orbital defenses, navigating to the exact location, and doing it all without triggering the dozens of alert systems that should have detected them, that took serious skill. The Tau are here, Archmagos Hephaestion announced, his mechadendrites twitching with what might have been excitement or anxiety. Water-caste diplomats accompanied by fire-caste honor guard. This is highly irregular. Styges 8 tolerates Xenos research, but actual Xenos visitors are. He paused, searching for the right descriptor. Unprecedented and probably heretical. Everything I do is apparently heretical, Duke replied, checking his weapons out of habit. Might as well meet these guys properly armed, just in case. Gaius and his kill team had already established defensive positions around the receiving bay, bolters trained on the landing zone. The Ultramarine's posture radiated controlled hostility, willing to tolerate Xeno's presence under inquisitorial authorization, but ready to purge them at the first sign of treachery. The Tau shuttle landed with mechanical grace, its design incorporating curves and aerodynamic principles that Imperial vehicles ignored in favor of brutal functionality. The assault ramp descended, and Duke got his first look at actual aliens from this universe. They were, surprisingly, not horrifying. Duke had fought pig cups, dimensional shamblers, and things that violated basic geometry. The Tau looked almost reasonable by comparison. Humanoid, blue-skinned, with faces that combined vaguely Asian features with hoofed feet and a general build that suggested they'd evolved from something herbivorous. They wore armor that managed to look both sleek and protective, incorporating technology that Duke's engineering eye recognized as sophisticated without being unnecessarily ornate. The leader, identified by slightly more elaborate armor and a presence that suggested command authority, stepped forward. His helmet retracted, revealing a face that held intelligence, caution, and something that might have been curiosity. "I am Porel Tau Kais of the Watercast," he said in perfect Gothic, his accent exotic but comprehensible. "I bring greetings from the Tau Empire and the Ethereal Council. We have traveled far to meet the human warrior who understands technology without requiring religious devotion." Duke raised an eyebrow. "Word travels fast. I've been on this Forge world less than a week. The Tau Empire monitors all developments that might affect the greater good," Kais replied smoothly. "When Inquisitor Cryptman informed us that a human from before the Imperium's formation had emerged, one who possesses Dark Age technological knowledge and operates independently of Imperial doctrine, the Ethereal Council deemed contact mandatory." Behind Kais, the Firecast warriors, battle-suited soldiers carrying weapons that hummed with plasma energy, maintained perfect discipline. They weren't threatening, but Duke noted their positioning: tactical, professional, ready to respond to threats without starting conflicts. He could respect that. "So what do you want?" Duke asked directly. "Technology exchange? Alliance? Intelligence on the Imperium's weaknesses?" Kais's expression suggested appreciation for Duke's directness. Honesty. Refreshing. He gestured toward the laboratory. "May we speak privately? What I propose is not for Imperial ears, even ears as sympathetic as Inquisitor Cryptman's agents." Gaius stepped forward immediately. "No. Duke Nukem does not meet with Xenos without protection." "Then bring your protection," Kais said reasonably. "But know that if you hear what I propose, you become complicit in what your Imperium would call treason. Is your loyalty to the chapter worth that risk?" Gaius's helmet turned toward Duke. Some silent communication passed between them: Duke's willingness to take risks, Gaius's duty to report everything to his superiors, and the complicated reality that the Ultramarine had become genuinely invested in Duke's success, despite all doctrine suggesting Xenos contact should end in immediate violence. "I will observe only," Gaius decided. "What you discuss is between you and the Xenos. I merely ensure no violence occurs." Kais performed a gesture that might have been a Tau bow. "Your pragmatism honors you, warrior. The greater good respects those who prioritize survival over dogma." They convened in a side chamber Hephaestion had prepared, one of the few spaces in the laboratory complex not under constant surveillance. The Archimagos had disabled monitoring equipment with the excuse of technical difficulties, buying them perhaps an hour before orthodox tech priests grew suspicious. Kais waited until the Firecast warriors had secured the perimeter before speaking. "Duke Nukem, may I call you Duke?" "Sure," Duke replied, sitting on an equipment crate with casual ease. "May I call you Kais, or is there some elaborate title thing I need to know?" "Kais is acceptable," the Tau confirmed. "The Watercast values communication efficiency." He activated a hololithic display from his armor's wrist-mounted projector. "I will be direct. The Tau Empire wants to help you." Duke's bullshit detector immediately activated. "Why?" "Because helping you serves the greater good," Kais explained. "The Tau Empire believes all species should cooperate rather than fight. We expand not through conquest, but through offering better alternatives to barbarism. Worlds join the Tauva, our greater good philosophy, because we provide superior quality of life, technology, and governance." "Sounds like propaganda," Duke observed. "It is propaganda," Kais agreed, "but propaganda based on truth. Tau-integrated human worlds have lower mortality rates, better living conditions, and freedom from the Imperium's religious tyranny." He gestured at the display, showing comparative statistics. "But we face a problem. The Imperium vastly outnumbers us. We cannot win through conventional warfare. We need asymmetric advantages." "And I'm an asymmetric advantage," Duke concluded. "You represent multiple advantages," Kais corrected. "First, your technology proves the Imperium's religious doctrine is false. The Emperor is not the source of humanity's greatness. Humans were great before him. That revelation could shatter faith, cause rebellions, create opportunities for Tau expansion. He pulled up new data. Second, your dimensional research could revolutionize warfare. Whoever masters non-warp transit controls the strategic future. And third, Duke prompted. Kais smiled, an expression that looked slightly wrong on his alien features but conveyed genuine emotion. Third, your proof that humans and aliens can cooperate based on mutual respect rather than domination. You worked with orcs through understanding their culture. You rejected chaos through individual conviction rather than religious indoctrination. You represent the philosophical foundation of the greater good, rational cooperation benefiting all parties. Duke had to admit, the Tau made a compelling case. Their philosophy of cooperation over conflict, reason over religion, quality of life over endless suffering. It sounded like the kind of civilization Earth had been working toward before he'd gotten pulled into this nightmare future. But Duke had also learned that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "What's the catch?" he asked. "Because every faction in this galaxy wants to use me for something. The Imperium wants me to fight their wars. The Mechanicus wants my technology. The Inquisition wants me to revolutionize transportation. What do the Tau really want?" Kaiser's expression became more serious. "The Ethereal Council wants you to defect, join the Tau Empire. Bring your knowledge, your technology, your philosophy. Help us build a future where humans and Tau cooperate as equals toward the greater good." "And if I refuse?" "Then we offer a lesser alternative. Technology exchange. You provide us with dimensional research data. We provide you with Tau technological expertise, specifically our dimensional stabilization matrices and phase shift generators." Kais pulled up technical specifications that made Duke's engineering instincts perk up with interest. "We have studied dimensional travel for centuries. We lack your Dark Age theoretical knowledge, but we have practical applications you need." Duke studied the data. The Tau's dimensional tech was different from his own, more focused on short-range teleportation and phase shifting than universe hopping, but the principles were compatible. Combining their research with his could accelerate the dimensional anchor's development by months, maybe years. "What would you want in exchange?" Duke asked. "Copies of your dimensional theory," Kai said. "Not the complete anchor design. We understand you want to maintain that for yourself. But the underlying mathematics, the quantum entanglement principles, the universal constant exploitations, knowledge we can use to improve our own technology." It was a fair trade, Duke had to admit. Both sides benefited, nobody got screwed over, and the Tau got valuable research without Duke compromising his ability to get home. Gaia spoke up from his observation position. "Duke, if you share Dark Age technology with Xenos, even through an Inquisitor's authorization, you commit tech heresy of the highest order. The Mechanicus would declare you abominable intelligence. The Imperium would hunt you across the galaxy." "They're already doing that," Duke pointed out. "Half the Mechanicus wants me dead. The Orthodox congregation considers my existence heresy, and I've got at least 3 factions plotting to either kill me, dissect me, or turn me into a servitor." He looked at Kais. "At least the Tau are being honest about what they want." Kais performed that Tau bow again. "We do not lie about our intentions. The greater good requires transparency. If you share knowledge with us, we will share knowledge with you. If you later choose to join the Tauva, we will welcome you. If you choose to return to your home universe, we will respect that decision and help you achieve it." "Even though me leaving means you lose access to my expertise?" Duke asked skeptically. "Yes," Kais confirmed, "because forcing you to stay would violate the greater good's principles. Cooperation must be willing, otherwise it is merely slavery with better PR." Duke made his decision. "All right, I'll share my dimensional theory with you. You provide your stabilization tech. We collaborate on the research, but I'm not joining the Tau Empire. I'm not defecting from the Imperium, because I was never part of it in the first place. And I'm reserving the right to shoot you if this turns out to be a trap." Fair terms, Kais agreed. I would expect nothing less from someone who negotiated with orcs by shrinking their war boss. Duke blinked. How do you know about that? The Tau Empire has excellent intelligence networks, Kais replied. We know about your actions on Cardia, your refusal of Slanesh's corruption, your work with Ultramarines against greater demons. We have been studying you for weeks, Duke Nukem. You are the most interesting human we have encountered in decades. They spent the next several hours in technical exchange, Duke explaining quantum entanglement principles while Kai demonstrated Tau phase shift technology. The Firecast warriors maintained security, Gaius observed, with the grim certainty that he was watching something that would change the galaxy, and somewhere in Stygi's A's depths, orthodox tech priests plotted responses to this unprecedented Xenos collaboration. As the Tau prepared to depart, Kais extended his hand in what was clearly a learned human gesture. This is how your species seals agreements, yes? Duke gripped the alien's hand, noting the three-fingered grip and slightly different bone structure. Yeah, it's called a handshake. Means we're trusting each other not to screw the other over. The greater good values trust, Kai said. I hope we meet again, Duke Nukem. You represent what humanity could be if freed from the Imperium's chains. After the Tau departed, Gaius stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, you have committed tech heresy, collaborated with Xenos, and potentially altered the balance of power in this sector. The Ultramarines chapter will need to be informed. Will you report everything? Duke asked. Gaius's helmet turned toward him. I will report that you engaged in sanctioned inquisitorial activities under Kryptman's authorization, which is technically accurate. What I discuss with you privately, warrior to warrior, remains between us. He paused. But know this, you walk a dangerous path. Every faction wants to use you. Eventually, you will be forced to choose sides completely. When that happens, what will guide your decision? Duke considered the question. He'd been asked variations of it by Creed, by Kryptman, by Kais, and now by Gaius. Everyone wanted to know where Duke Nukem's loyalty ultimately lay. I'll choose humanity, Duke said finally. Not the Imperium, not the Tau Empire, not any faction or philosophy. I'll choose what's best for human survival and flourishing. And if that means working with aliens, defying the Imperium, or pissing off everyone equally, then that's what I'll do. That philosophy, Gaius said quietly, is the most dangerous thing I have ever heard, because it is not heresy, it is not treason, it is simply reasonable, and reason has no place in the Imperium of man. Duke returned to the dimensional anchor, his head filled with new data from Tau research, new complications from inquisitorial politics, and the growing certainty that building this device was going to attract every faction in the galaxy like moths to a really interesting flame. Just another Tuesday, he muttered, integrating Tau phase shift principles into his anchor's design. Except this Tuesday involves aliens, heresy, and probably starting a war. So, a good Tuesday. The dimensional anchor's first test was scheduled for a controlled activation. Low power, minimal dimensional penetration, just enough to prove the theoretical framework functioned. Duke had triple-checked every calculation, verified every component, and confirmed with both Archmagus Hephaestion and the Tau technical data that the power levels were safely within tolerances. Which is why, when the anchor tore a hole in reality that consumed half the laboratory and nearly destroyed Stygi's fate, Duke's first reaction was professional offense that his calculations had been so catastrophically wrong. It started normally enough. Duke activated the primary power matrix, watched the dimensional resonance fields build to stable frequencies, and monitored the quantum entanglement as it began reaching across universal barriers. The anchor hummed with controlled energy, its crystalline components glowing with light that existed in colors Duke's eyes couldn't quite process. Dimensional penetration at 15%, Hephaestion reported, his mechadendrites dancing across control interfaces. Resonance stable, warp interference minimal. We are successfully creating a non-immaterium pathway. Duke watched his readouts, satisfaction building as months of work paid off. The anchor was finding his home universe's dimensional signature, beginning to establish a connection that would... The readouts spiked. Not gradually, instantly, from 15% to 97% in a microsecond that shouldn't have been physically possible. "Emergency shutdown," Duke shouted, his hands already moving toward the kill switches. Too late. The dimensional anchor didn't just open a pathway, it ripped one. Reality screamed as fundamental forces that should never interact collided with each other. The laboratory's center vanished, replaced by a wound in space-time that bled impossible energies. Through the breach, Duke caught glimpses of places that shouldn't exist, geometries folded wrong, colors that made his augmented vision systems crash, and something vast moving in the spaces between universes. "Geller fields to maximum," Gaius roared over the Vox, his Ultramarines kill team forming defensive positions around the breach. "All personnel evacuate. This is not a drill." But evacuation was impossible. The dimensional wound was expanding, consuming floor, walls, ceiling, and anyone too slow to move. A tech priest's scream cut off mid-syllable as he ceased to exist, his molecular structure unraveled by forces that treated physical laws as suggestions. Duke's combat instincts overrode his shock. He couldn't shut down the anchor. The controls had been the first thing consumed by the breach. He couldn't seal the wound. It was growing exponentially, feeding on its own expansion, which left option 3, disrupt the dimensional resonance violently enough to collapse the entire system. "Everybody get back," Duke shouted, pulling his RPG from its harness. "I'm gonna blow it." "That's insane," Hephaestion protested, even as his tracks carried him toward the exit at maximum speed. "The explosion will destroy half the Forge complex. Better than a dimensional breach destroying the whole planet," Duke fired. The rocket spiraled toward the anchor's power core, trailing smoke and American-style problem-solving. It impacted, detonated, and for one perfect moment, the dimensional breach and the chemical explosion existed in the same space. Physics had a nervous breakdown trying to determine which impossible event took priority. The breach collapsed, not smoothly, but catastrophically, like a soap bubble popping, except the bubble was made of reality and the pop shattered dimensional barriers across 3 different universes simultaneously. The shockwave sent Duke flying, his jetpack activating reflexively to prevent him from being crushed against the far wall. When the smoke cleared, the laboratory was gone. Just gone. A perfect hemisphere had been carved from Stygi's structure, its edges showing molecular-level precision cuts that exposed inner workings to the planet's toxic atmosphere. The dimensional anchor was vapor. Hephaestion's months of work had been reduced to scattered atoms, and standing at the crater's center, where the breach had been strongest, was something that shouldn't exist. It was a doorway, not physical. Duke could see through it to the Forge world's industrial sprawl beyond, but also absolutely present, a standing portal that led elsewhere. Through it, Duke caught glimpses of architecture that predated humanity, of machinery that made the Mechanicus's most sacred devices look like children's toys, of a tomb that had been waiting for 60 million years to be disturbed. "What have you done?" Hephaestion whispered, his Vox grills struggling to process audio through damaged synthesizers. "That's not a warp breach. That's not dimensional travel. That's a door to something ancient," Gaius finished, his bolter trained on the portal. "Something that was buried, something that was sleeping." The portal shimmered and shapes began emerging. Not the chaotic forms of demons or the organic wrongness of warp entities. These were mechanical, precise, moving with the mathematical perfection of clockwork built by a civilization that had mastered death itself. Necron warriors stepped through the portal, their gauss flares charging with green energy that promised molecular disintegration. Behind them came larger forms, Necron immortals in heavy frames, and towering above them all, a Necron lord whose presence made the air taste like ozone and ancient malice. Duke's threat assessment systems went into overdrive. Hostile contacts numbering approximately 50. Weapons capable of reducing targets to component atoms. Armor that had survived 60 million years of entropy, and most importantly, they were staring directly at him. Target the human with the dimensional resonator signature, the Necron Lord declared, its voice grinding metal given consciousness. Secure him for analysis. Terminate all others. Well, Duke said, raising his devastator. That's not friendly. The Necrons opened fire. Gauss weapons spat beams that struck Ultramarine's power armor and began unmaking it layer by molecular layer. The Space Marines returned fire, bolters roaring, but the explosive rounds that could reduce buildings to rubble bounced off Necron living metal that repaired damage faster than it accumulated. Fall back, Gaius ordered, his tactical assessment recognizing an unwinnable engagement. Establish defensive perimeter, call for reinforcements. Duke didn't fall back. He'd learned long ago that the best defense was aggressive offense, especially against enemies who thought they were invincible. His devastator roared, explosive rounds hammering into the closest Necron warriors with sustained fire that even living metal couldn't repair quickly enough. The warriors staggered, their bodies showing damage, their internal mechanisms exposed. But instead of falling, they began to phase out, teleporting back through the portal for repair, their consciousness preserved in tomb world systems that refused to let them truly die. They're teleporting, Duke shouted. We can't kill them, they just respawn. Then we cannot win, Gaius stated grimly, his power sword cleaving through a Necron warrior that immediately began phasing out. We can only delay. The Necron Lord raised one hand, and the battle froze. Every Necron unit stopped firing simultaneously, standing motionless with eerie precision. The Lord's glowing eyes focused on Duke with intensity that suggested deep scanning beyond visible light. You possess technology from the War in Heaven era, the Lord stated. Not asked, stated as if reading data directly from Duke's equipment. Your dimensional resonator utilizes principles concurrent with our own phase shift matrices. Your power generation incorporates fusion containment methodologies from the age before flesh things achieved sentience. The metallic head tilted. Yet you are human, young race vermin who should not possess such knowledge. Explain. Duke lowered his devastator slightly, not dropping it, but signaling willingness to talk rather than fight. I'm from Earth's past. Before your war in heaven, before the Imperium, before humanity forgot how to build things properly. He gestured at the ruined laboratory. I was building a dimensional anchor to go home. Your tomb world just happened to be on the other side of the dimensional barrier I accidentally breached. The Necron Lord processed this information with computational speed that made human thought look glacial. You are a temporal anomaly. A human from the dark age of technology or earlier, possessing knowledge that approaches the level of the Old One's servant races. Its eyes brightened. Fascinating. Such an anomaly has research value to the Triarch Praetorians. I'm not a research specimen, Duke said flatly. You are whatever my dynasty determines you to be, the Lord replied. However, pragmatism dictates cooperation is more efficient than conflict. I am Nemesor Zandrek of the Sautek dynasty. I propose a temporary cessation of hostilities while we discuss your situation. Gaius's vox crackled with disbelief. Duke, you cannot negotiate with Xenos abominations. Necrons are the ultimate threat, soulless machines that seek to exterminate all life. Yeah, but they're also not currently shooting at us, Duke pointed out, and I'm curious what a 60-million-year-old robot wants to discuss. Nemesor Zandrek performed a gesture that might have been aristocratic acknowledgement, probably a holdover from when Necrons had been flesh and blood before biotransference turned them into living metal. You possess wisdom rare among young races. Very well. We shall converse. The Necron Lord waved a hand, and the portal stabilized, its edges crystallizing into a permanent structure. Through it, Duke could see the tomb world beyond, endless halls of stasis crypts, machinery that had operated flawlessly for millions of years, and the sleeping forms of billions of Necron warriors waiting to be awakened. My dynasty has slumbered for 63 million years, Zandrek explained. We were awakened by your dimensional breach, which resonated at frequencies our monitoring systems recognized as technological rather than warp-based. The ancient robot gestured at Duke. You are attempting to escape this era, to return to a time when your species possessed greatness rather than superstition. I sympathize. You sympathize, Duke repeated skeptically. My dynasty also seeks escape, Zandrek confirmed. We were once flesh beings of the Necrontire race, mortal, short-lived, envious of the Old One's immortality. We accepted biotransference, became eternal, and discovered eternity in metal bodies as damnation. The Lord's voice carried something that might have been ancient regret. Now we seek to reverse the process, to restore flesh, to reclaim what we sacrificed. Your dimensional technology could provide insights toward that goal. Duke was beginning to understand why Cryptman had warned that dimensional research would attract attention. He'd accidentally opened a door to a tomb full of 60-million-year-old robots who saw his anchor as potential salvation from their mechanical immortality. So what do you want? Duke asked. Technology exchange? Alliance? A copy of my research? Information sharing, Zandrek replied. You provide dimensional theory and universal constant exploitation methodologies. We provide phase shift technology, living metal synthesis protocols, and temporal manipulation principles from the War in Heaven era. The Necron Lord's eyes gleamed. Together, we achieve goals neither could accomplish alone. And if I refuse, then we take the information by force, dissect your technology, and extract your neural patterns for analysis, Zandrek stated matter-of-factly. However, such methods are inefficient and yield inferior results. Willing cooperation produces better data. Gaius was broadcasting increasingly urgent warnings over the Vox, calling for orbital strikes, requesting exterminatus authorization, doing everything short of physically dragging Duke away. But Duke was thinking through the implications. The Necrons had technology from an era when gods walked the galaxy. They'd fought wars against the Old Ones that had literally broken reality. Their knowledge could accelerate the dimensional anchor's reconstruction by years, possibly decades. But they were also soulless machines whose dynasties had spent millions of years conquering, exterminating, and harvesting lesser species. Counteroffer, Duke said. I share my dimensional theory. Not the complete anchor design, just the underlying principles. You provide phase shift tech and temporal manipulation data, but you pull your forces back through that portal, seal it from your side, and promise not to invade Stygies 8 or anywhere else in this sector. Zandrek's metallic features couldn't show expression, but his posture suggested consideration. You bargain from weakness yet propose terms as if from strength. Admirable audacity. However, your terms are unacceptable. The portal remains open as insurance. My forces maintain presence here until technology exchange is complete. Then we withdraw. And how do I know you won't just betray me once you have what you want? Duke asked. You do not, Zandrek admitted. But consider, my dynasty has existed for 63 million years. We think in terms of millennia, not moments. Betraying you gains short-term advantage, but costs long-term potential cooperation. We prefer the latter. Duke made the calculation. work with ancient death robots, or refuse and fight a battle he couldn't win. Neither option was good, but at least the first one didn't immediately end in his death. Fine, Duke agreed. But I'm setting ground rules. No attacking Imperial forces while we're negotiating. No harvesting anyone for your creepy biotransference experiments. And if I see you breaking these rules, the deal's off and I start shooting. Acceptable, Zandrek said. We shall begin immediately. My cryptech will interface with your systems. A new Necron emerged through the portal. This one draped in robes of living metal, carrying a staff that pulsed with energies Duke's sensors couldn't classify. The cryptech approached the ruins of the dimensional anchor, began scanning with instruments that predated human civilization, and spoke in binary code that sounded like mathematics achieving consciousness. Hephaestion, watching from the defensive perimeter, transmitted privately to Duke. This is madness. You're collaborating with Necrons. The Mechanicus will declare you the worst heretic in Imperial history. Yeah, probably, Duke agreed. But right now, these ancient robots are the only ones offering me a realistic path home. So I'm going to take the deal and figure out the consequences later. That philosophy will kill you, Hephaestion warned. Maybe, Duke said. But at least I'll die trying to solve my problems instead of hiding from them. As Necron and human technology began interfacing, two approaches to dimensional manipulation separated by 60 million years of history finally meeting in desperate collaboration, Duke couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a deal that would change everything. For better or worse, remained to be seen. The Necron cryptech, identified as Technomancer Arxakis, worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent millions of years perfecting their craft. Duke watched the ancient robot reassemble the dimensional anchor's theoretical framework, incorporating Necron phase shift technology with casual expertise that made Hephaestion's mechadendrites twitch with acquisitive hunger. Your approach is crude but conceptually sound, Arxakis stated, his voice like binary code processed through a meat grinder. You attempt to punch through dimensional barriers through brute force quantum entanglement. Inefficient. The old ones taught their servant races elegance, exploiting natural weaknesses and universal constants rather than forcing passage. The old ones are the godlike beings who created the Eldar and fought you guys millions of years ago, right? Duke asked, trying to keep up with 60-million-year-old history lessons. The old ones were arrogant flesh creatures who hoarded immortality and sparked the war in heaven through their selfishness. Arxakis corrected with what might have been ancient bitterness. We destroyed them. We shattered their creations. We proved that mortality armed with technology surpasses immortal complacency. The cryptech paused. Then we became the very immortals we despised, trapped in metal bodies for eternity. The universe has a cruel sense of irony. Duke had to admit the Necrons' backstory was pretty grim even by 40K standards. An entire species tricked into giving up their souls for immortality, only to discover immortality without purpose was worse than death. So why help me? Duke asked. If you've been around this long, seen empires rise and fall, why care about one human trying to go home? Arxakis' glowing eyes focused on Duke with unnerving intensity. Because you represent something we have not encountered in 63 million years. Genuine novelty. Your technology approaches ours in sophistication despite originating from a species that evolved yesterday in galactic terms. You solve problems through understanding rather than application of preserved templates. The cryptech gestured at the partially reconstructed anchor. You are what the Necrontier could have become if we had not chosen biotransference's damnation. That intrigues us. Nemesor Zandrek, who'd been observing the collaboration from his position at the portal, spoke up. Additionally, your dimensional research may provide insights toward reversing biotransference. If we can manipulate universal constants, perhaps we can manipulate the fundamental nature of our existence. Restore what was lost, reclaim flesh. Is that even possible? Duke asked. You've been robots, for 60 million years. Your original bodies are dust. How would you even restore them? We retain genetic patterns in stasis archives, Zandrek explained. We possess biotransference reversal theories developed by our greatest cryptex. What we lack is the dimensional manipulation necessary to bridge the gap between mechanical present and a biological past. His metallic features somehow conveyed ancient longing. If your anchor can connect across universes, perhaps modified technology could connect across states of being. Duke was beginning to understand the bigger picture. He wasn't just building a device to go home, he was accidentally developing technology that could fundamentally alter reality itself. Dimensions, time, matter states, all potentially manipulable with the right understanding of universal constants. No wonder every faction in the galaxy was interested. "All right," Duke said. "Let's say I help you figure this out. Let's say we build technology that can restore your flesh bodies. What happens then? You've spent millions of years as conquerors and exterminators. Do you suddenly become peaceful just because you're organic again?" Zandrek was silent for a long moment, longer than necessary for a being whose thought processes operated at computational speeds. "I do not know," he admitted finally. "I have commanded legions for millions of years, conquered countless worlds, exterminated species whose names are forgotten dust. Could such a being return to peace?" His eyes dimmed slightly. "Perhaps not. Perhaps we are too far gone. But I would like the opportunity to find out." The honesty was unexpected. Duke had assumed Necrons were just emotionless killing machines, but Zandrek displayed something approaching genuine remorse. Either it was sophisticated manipulation, or these ancient robots retained more of their original personalities than 40K lore suggested. Before Duke could respond, Gaius's Vox crackled with urgent warning. Multiple Imperial vessels entering orbit, inquisitorial signatures, all protocols, their broadcasting demands for immediate planetary lockdown and Duke Nukem's surrender. Duke groaned. Of course. Because this situation wasn't complicated enough. Zandrek's posture shifted to combat ready. "Imperial forces seek to capture you. Standard young race irrationality, destroying assets rather than exploiting them. We shall eliminate the threat." "No," Duke said quickly. "No shooting Inquisitors unless absolutely necessary. That'll just make everything worse." "Everything is already worse," Arxakis observed. "You have collaborated with Tau, accepted inquisitorial heresy, opened portals to tomb worlds, and most damningly, proven that the Imperium's technological religion is false. By their standards, you are the ultimate heretic. They will not negotiate." Duke hated that the ancient death robot was probably right. The Vox crackled again, this time with an unfamiliar voice. Cold, authoritative, carrying the weight of absolute power. "This is Inquisitor Lord Torquemada Cotius of the Ordo Malleus. Duke Nukem, you are hereby declared excommunicate traitoris for tech heresy, Xenos collaboration, and crimes against the Imperium too numerous to enumerate. Surrender immediately, or face orbital bombardment." "Cotius," Gaius said quietly over a private channel. "One of the most powerful Inquisitors alive, Puritan faction leader. If he's here personally, the politics have escalated to the highest levels." Duke activated his own Vox, broadcasting on open channels. "Inquisitor Coteas, this is Duke Nukem. I'm operating under Inquisitor Cryptman's authorization. Everything I've done has been sanctioned by the Ordo Xenos. So maybe hold off on the excommunication until you check with your colleagues." "Inquisitor Cryptman has been censured by the Conclave of Thor," Coteas replied. "Her authorization is revoked. Her radical agenda has been deemed heretical. And you, Duke Nukem, are the ultimate proof of her corruption, a walking tech heresy she unleashed upon the Imperium." Well, that was bad. "Multiple inquisitorial factions converging," Hephaestion reported, his sensors tracking orbital traffic. "I count 12 separate vessels. This is unprecedented. They're bringing enough firepower to destroy this forge world entirely. Zandrek turned to Duke. You cannot fight the Imperium directly. Even my dynasty's full strength would struggle against coordinated Imperial response. You must choose, surrender and face certain execution, or accept Necron Asylum. Come with us through the portal. We will protect you while you complete the dimensional anchor. That's not a choice, Duke protested. That's just trading one prison for another. It is survival, Zandrek corrected. Complete your anchor, return to your universe, or remain here and die at inquisitorial hands. I do not see a third option. Duke's mind raced through possibilities. He could fight, take on the Inquisition directly, probably die in the attempt, but at least go down swinging. He could run, try to escape Stygi's weight, find another planet, continue as a fugitive. Or he could accept Zandrek's offer, work with the Necrons, finish the anchor in their tomb world, and hope they kept their word about letting him leave. All terrible options. Before Duke could decide, the Vox crackled with a new voice. One Duke recognized with relief. This is Inquisitor Cryptman. Duke, don't surrender. I'm bringing allies. Hold position for 12 minutes. Your authorization is revoked. Koteas's voice cut in. You have no authority here, Cryptman. Stand down or be declared heretic yourself. Then declare me heretic, Cryptman replied. But know that if you fire on Stygi's weight, you destroy the most valuable asset humanity has gained in 10,000 years. Duke Nukem represents proof that we were once great without the Emperor's divinity. Proof that technology works through understanding, not prayer. Proof that humanity can cooperate with Xenos when necessary. Her voice hardened. Destroy him, and you prove the Imperium fears truth more than chaos. Silence on the Vox. Duke imagined the political calculations happening in orbit. Puritan inquisitors weighing doctrine against pragmatism. Radical inquisitors defending Cryptman, and somewhere in the middle, people trying to figure out whether Duke was salvation or damnation. Inquisitor Cryptman, Koteas said finally, you have been a valued servant of the Imperium for decades. Do not throw away your legacy by defending this abomination. He is tech heresy incarnate. He collaborates with Xenos. He undermines faith. He represents everything the Emperor warned against. He represents what the Emperor was, Cryptman countered. A scientist, an engineer, a pragmatist who used Xenos technology when necessary and rejected superstition in favor of understanding. Duke Nukem is more loyal to the Emperor's actual philosophy than your doctrine has been in millennia. That argument apparently struck a nerve. The Vox went silent again, and Duke could practically feel the theological crisis rippling through the inquisitorial fleet. Gaius stepped closer to Duke, his voice private. Whatever happens, the Ultramarines honor our word. We swore to protect you. If you choose to fight, we fight beside you. If you choose to flee, we'll buy you time. Your choice. Duke looked around at the impossible situation. Necron warriors at the portal offering escape into a tomb world. Ultramarines forming defensive positions, ready to die for someone they'd known less than 2 months. Archmagos Hephaestion coordinating with tech priests who'd been inspired by Duke's teachings. And somewhere in orbit, inquisitorial factions debating whether to save him or execute him. I'm not running, Duke said finally. Not to the Necrons, not from the Inquisition, not from anyone. I came to this forge world to build my anchor and go home. That's what I'm doing. And if the Imperium wants to stop me, they can try. But they're going to find out what happens when you threaten Duke Nukem. Zandrek's metallic features somehow conveyed approval. Spoken like a warrior. Very well. My forces will defend this position until your inquisitorial allies arrive. Consider it investment in future cooperation. You're defending me? Duke asked, surprised. You are a valuable research asset and potential ally, Zandrek explained. Allowing the Imperium to destroy you would be wasteful. Besides, The ancient Necron Lord performed what might have been a smile if his metal face permitted it. "I find your defiance entertaining. It has been millions of years since I encountered anyone who refused to simply accept their circumstances." Duke grinned, despite the insanity of the situation. "Yeah, accepting circumstances isn't really my style. Never has been, never will be." The Necron forces arrayed themselves in defensive positions with military precision that came from millions of years of warfare. Gauss flayers charged, ready to molecularly disintegrate anyone who threatened their new ally. The Ultramarines took complementary positions, their bolters providing overlapping fields of fire, and at the center of it all, Duke Nukem stood, with his weapons ready, surrounded by ancient death robots and gene-forged super soldiers, facing down the entire Inquisition. "You know," Duke said conversationally, "when I woke up today, I did not expect to be defended by 60-million-year-old robots against an inquisitorial execution fleet." "You have led an unusual life," Arxakis observed, still working on the dimensional anchor's reconstruction. "I have been operational for 63 million years and have never encountered circumstances quite like this." "That's because Duke Nukem doesn't do normal circumstances," Duke replied. "I do impossible victories, last-minute saves, and walking away from explosions while one-liners echo behind me." "Your psychological profile suggests delusion or supreme confidence," Arxakis stated. "I have not yet determined which." "Both," Duke said. "It's called being the hero. You guys should try it sometime." The Vox crackled with Kripman's voice. 5 minutes out. Bringing Tau diplomatic envoy, 3 radical inquisitors, and documentation proving Duke's value exceeds execution risks. Cotias is wavering. If we can demonstrate Duke's cooperation benefits the Imperium more than his death, we might avoid orbital bombardment. "And if we can't?" Duke asked. "Then we all die gloriously and become footnotes in Imperial history," Kripman replied. "But I'm optimistic. After all, you're Duke Nukem. You don't do dying gloriously. You do surviving implausibly and making everyone else look bad in comparison." Duke couldn't argue with that assessment. The inquisitorial delegation that descended to Stygius VIII was unprecedented in both scope and political complexity. Duke watched through the laboratory's partially repaired viewports as a dozen shuttles landed in formation, disgorging inquisitors from multiple ordos, their retinues, servo skulls recording everything, and enough firepower to conquer a small planet. Inquisitor Kripman led the radical faction, 3 inquisitors whose armor incorporated Xenos technology, whose methods were considered heretical by Orthodox standards, and whose results spoke for themselves. Behind them came Porel Kais and a Tau diplomatic team. Their presence alone was enough to trigger religious crisis among Orthodox Mechanicus observers. Inquisitor Lord Cotes led the Puritan faction, 5 inquisitors in traditional armor covered with purity seals, accompanied by battle sisters from the Adepta Sororitas, whose faith burned bright enough to make Duke's enhanced nervous system register psychic pressure. Their expressions promised violence if negotiations failed. And standing between them, trying to broker peace, was an inquisitor Duke hadn't met before, a woman in simple robes whose only decoration was an inquisitorial rosette so old it looked like it had witnessed the Horus heresy personally. "I am Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus," she announced, her voice carrying authority earned through centuries of service. "I have been appointed conclave arbitrator to determine Duke Nukem's fate. All factions will present evidence. I will render judgment. This judgment will be final and binding across all ordos." Duke stepped forward, very aware that Necron warriors, Ultramarines, and Tau Fire caste were all within engagement range of this powder keg. "Before we start the trial, can I just point out that having it in a partially destroyed laboratory, surrounded by 3 different armies, seems like a terrible venue choice." "Silence!" Coteus snapped. "You do not speak until addressed directly." Your presence here is tolerated only because inquisitorial law demands you face your accusers." "Actually," Duke replied, "I'm not part of your Imperium, so your laws don't apply to me. I'm an independent agent who's been cooperating with various Imperial factions out of the goodness of my heart. So if we're doing this trial thing, I want it clear that I'm here voluntarily and can leave whenever I want." The Puritan inquisitors looked ready to execute Duke on the spot for sheer audacity. But Covenant held up one hand, forestalling violence. An interesting legal argument. Duke Nukem claims sovereignty as a pre-imperial human, therefore not subject to imperial jurisdiction. She looked at Cotias. "Do you dispute this claim?" Cotias's jaw tightened. "All humans are subjects of the Emperor, regardless of their origin timeline. To claim otherwise is heresy." "Is it?" Cryptman interjected. "The Emperor united humanity through conquest and cooperation. Duke Nukem predates that. Unification. By what legal principle does he owe the Imperium allegiance he never swore?" The theological and legal debate that followed made Duke's head hurt. Inquisitors quoted imperial law, cited precedents from the Great Crusade, invoked the Emperor's divine authority, and argued about whether time-displaced humans counted as imperial citizens or Xenos-adjacent entities requiring separate classification. Finally, Covenant silenced the debate with a gesture. "Enough. We will proceed under the assumption that Duke Nukem is a potential imperial citizen whose status will be determined by these proceedings. If found loyal and valuable, he gains full imperial citizenship. If found heretical and dangerous, he faces excommunicate traitorous regardless of origin." She looked at Duke. "Is this acceptable?" Duke considered his options. He could reject the entire proceeding, try to fight his way out, and become a permanent fugitive. Or he could engage with their legal system, prove his value, and maybe buy enough goodwill to finish his dimensional anchor without constant inquisitorial interference. "Fine," Duke agreed. "Let's do this. But I reserve the right to walk away if the trial becomes a kangaroo court." "What is a kangaroo court?" one of the Puritan inquisitors asked. "It's when you've already decided guilt and the trial is just theater," Duke explained. "We had lots of those in my time too. Didn't like them then, won't tolerate them now." Covenant's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Noted. We shall endeavor to avoid kangaroo courts." She activated a hololithic recorder. "Proceedings begin. Inquisitor Lord Cotias, present charges against Duke Nukem." Cotias stepped forward, his presence radiating righteous fury. "Duke Nukem stands accused of tech heresy, Xenos collaboration, undermining imperial faith, corrupting the cult Mechanicus, and crimes against the Emperor's divine order, too numerous to fully enumerate." He pulled up hololithic evidence, recordings of Duke teaching tech priests to understand rather than worship technology, footage of him negotiating with orcs, transcripts of his refusal to acknowledge the Emperor's divinity, and surveillance of his collaboration with Tau and Necrons. "Each of these acts," Cotias continued, "represents capital offense individually. Combined, they paint a picture of systematic heresy orchestrated by someone who rejects every principle the Imperium holds sacred. Duke Nukem is not merely a heretic, he is heresy personified, a living argument against the Emperor's wisdom, and such arguments must be silenced before they spread further corruption." The evidence was damning, Duke had to admit. Watching himself on holo projector, casually explaining physics to tech priests, laughing with orcs, shaking hands with Tau, made his actions look like coordinated conspiracy against the Imperium itself. Covenant turned to Cryptman. "Inquisitor Cryptman, you authorized Duke Nukem's activities. Present, your defense." Cryptman stepped forward, her expression fierce. "Everything Duke Nukem has done serves humanity's survival and advancement. He won battles on Cadia that saved thousands of Imperial lives. He resisted chaos corruption without requiring the Emperor's blessing, proving humans can fight darkness through individual conviction. He taught Mechanicus adepts to actually understand technology, potentially recovering knowledge lost since the Dark Age. She gestured at poor Kais. And yes, he worked with Xenos, because pragmatic cooperation achieves results that dogmatic xenophobia cannot. She pulled up her own evidence. Casualty reports from Cadia showing Duke's impact, testimonials from Cadians whose lives he'd saved, research data from Magos Kern demonstrating technological advancement, and strategic assessments from Ultramarines confirming his effectiveness against greater demons. Duke Nukem represents what humanity was before the Imperium, Cryptman continued. A species that valued understanding over faith, cooperation over isolation, and individual worth over collective servitude. The Emperor himself embodied these principles during the Great Crusade. To execute Duke for following the Emperor's actual philosophy, rather than the Imperium's corrupted interpretation, would be the true heresy. The two cases were compelling in opposite ways. Koteas represented imperial orthodoxy, rigid, uncompromising, built on 10,000 years of precedent. Cryptman represented pragmatic heterodoxy, flexible, results-oriented, willing to bend rules for survival. Covenant looked at Duke. You have heard the accusations and defense. Do you wish to speak before judgment is rendered? Duke stood, very conscious that every word he said next would be recorded, analyzed, and potentially used as justification for either salvation or execution. He could play it safe, apologize, promise to follow imperial doctrine, try to appease the Puritans. But that wasn't who he was. Yeah, I've got something to say, Duke confirmed. I came to this universe by accident, didn't ask to be here, didn't want to be here, and have been working non-stop to get back home. But while I've been stuck in the 41st millennium, I've tried to do right by humanity. I've fought your wars, saved your soldiers, and yes, I've questioned your dogma when it seemed counterproductive. He looked at Koteas. You call that heresy. I call it common sense. Where I come from, we didn't worship technology. We understood it. We didn't treat aliens as automatic enemies. We evaluated them based on their actions. And we didn't demand blind faith from our people. We earned their trust through results. He turned to Cryptman. You call that the Emperor's true philosophy? Maybe. I don't know the guy personally, but I know this. The Imperium you've built is dying. You're losing wars, hemorrhaging worlds, drowning in bureaucracy and superstition. And you're so terrified of change that you'd rather execute someone trying to help than admit your system isn't working. The Puritan inquisitors looked ready to start shooting. Duke raised his hand, forestalling violence. But here's the thing. I'm not trying to destroy the Imperium. I'm not secretly worshipping chaos. I'm just a guy who wants to go home and happens to have skills you need. So here's my offer. Let me finish my dimensional anchor. Let me return to my own time. And in exchange, I'll share what I know, not as an imperial subject, but as an ally. Technology, tactics, whatever knowledge helps humanity survive. And if we refuse, Koteas asked coldly, then you lose, Duke said simply. You lose my expertise, you lose the dimensional research, and you prove that the Imperium values doctrine over survival. You'll execute me, congratulate yourselves on purging heresy, and in 1,000 years, when the Imperium finally collapses under its own weight, historians will point to this moment as when you chose failure over adaptation. The silence that followed was absolute. Duke had just told the Inquisition that their precious Imperium was doomed, and that killing him would accelerate that doom. It was the kind of statement that usually ended in immediate execution. But something in Covenant's expression suggested she'd heard similar thoughts from others. Older, wiser voices that whispered the Imperium couldn't last forever. Inquisitor Koteas, Covenant said quietly, you argue Duke Nukem must die to preserve Imperial doctrine. But what if doctrine is killing us? What if the Emperor's true message was adaptability, and we've replaced it with rigid orthodoxy? That is heresy. Koteas stated flatly. Perhaps, Covenant agreed, or perhaps it's wisdom we're too afraid to acknowledge. She turned to the assembled Inquisitors. I've heard evidence from both factions. I have witnessed Duke Nukem's defiance and understood his perspective. I am prepared to render judgment. Every weapon in the chamber, bolters, gauss flares, pulse rifles, tightened on their targets, ready for the violence that would inevitably follow whichever way this decision went. Covenant activated her inquisitorial rosette, broadcasting her judgment across all Vox channels for Imperial record. Duke Nukem, I find you guilty of tech heresy, Xenos collaboration, and defiance of Imperial doctrine. She paused. However, I also find these crimes were committed in service to humanity's survival and advancement. Therefore, I render the following judgment. Conditional sanction. What? Koteas exclaimed. That's not a recognized... I am conclave arbitrator, Covenant interrupted. I create precedent. Duke Nukem is hereby sanctioned to operate with limited autonomy under inquisitorial oversight. He will complete his dimensional anchor project under supervision. He will share technological knowledge through controlled channels, and when his anchor is functional, he will be permitted to return to his origin timeline, taking with him the knowledge that humanity's future went dark, hoping he can prevent similar fate for his own era. It wasn't complete freedom, but it was better than execution. Duke could live with it. Koteas looked ready to challenge the judgment, but Covenant's authority as arbitrator was absolute. The Puritan Inquisitor's expression promised this wasn't over, that Orthodox factions would continue plotting Duke's downfall. But for now, the immediate threat had passed. I accept your judgment, Duke said formally, and I'll uphold my end. But know this, I'm not doing this out of fear or duty. I'm doing it because humanity deserves better than the nightmare you've built. And maybe, just maybe, teaching you what we were will help you become something better. Cryptman approached Duke, her expression carrying relief mixed with concern. You just told the Inquisition their Imperium is doomed. That took either incredible courage or suicidal stupidity. Both, Duke confirmed. It's kinda my brand. Por-El Kai stepped forward, performing his Tau bow. Duke Nukem, the Tau Empire respects your defiance of irrational authority. Should you ever tire of the Imperium's tyranny, the greater good remains open to you. Appreciated, Duke said. But I'm going home. No offense to your greater good, but I prefer my own good where I don't have to choose between Imperial zealotry and alien philosophies. Nemesor Zandrek approached, his Necron warriors forming an honor guard. Your judgment is rendered. Our cooperation continues until the anchor is complete. Then we withdraw to our tomb world, carrying knowledge that may yet restore what we lost. His metallic voice carried something approaching gratitude. You have given us hope, Duke Nukem, a rare gift for beings who have existed hopeless for millions of years. As the various factions began withdrawing, Inquisitors to their ships, Tau to their diplomatic vessels, Necrons to their portal, Duke found himself alone with Gaius and Hephaestion in the ruined laboratory. Well, Duke said, surveying the damage, that could have gone worse. You survived trial by Inquisition, Gaius observed, created legal precedent that will be debated for centuries, maintained alliances with 3 different xenospecies, and somehow emerged with conditional sanction to continue your work. The Space Marine's tone carried something that might have been respect. Either the Emperor truly protects you, or you are the luckiest human in galactic history. I prefer skilled, Duke replied. Luck is for amateurs. I make my own fortune through superior firepower and questionable life choices. Hephaestion's mechadendrites performed that gesture that might have been amusement. The dimensional anchor can be rebuilt, with Necron assistance, Tau data, and your expertise. Completion is estimated at 3 months. Then you can return home. 3 months. Duke could survive 3 more months in the 41st millennium. Deal with the politics, finish his work, and finally escape this grim-dark nightmare back to his own time where the worst problems were alien invasions that could be solved with guns and attitude. "All right," Duke said. "Let's finish this. Let's build an anchor that works. Let's prove humans from the Dark Age can still accomplish impossible things. And then let's get me the hell home before I become permanent resident of history's worst timeline." "Agreed," Hephaestion said. "Though I must note, your presence has already changed this timeline significantly. The knowledge you've shared, the precedents you've set, the hope you've inspired, these cannot be taken back. Whether you leave or stay, Duke Nukem's legacy will persist." Duke hadn't thought about legacy. He'd been too focused on survival and escape. But Hephaestion was right. He'd changed things. The roughnecks on Cadia, the tech priests learning understanding, the inquisitors forced to acknowledge pragmatism over dogma, even ancient Necrons given hope they might reclaim their flesh. "Yeah, well," Duke said, uncomfortable with the philosophical weight. "If my legacy is humanity can be better than this, I guess that's not terrible. Could be worse. Could be that idiot who got himself killed by demons." "That legacy is also possible," Gaius noted. 3 months is sufficient time for countless things to go catastrophically wrong. The forces arrayed against you, Orthodox Mechanicus, Puritan Inquisitors, Chaos agents seeking your corruption, Xenos factions pursuing their own agendas, will not rest simply because Covenant issued conditional sanction. "Then I guess the next 3 months are going to be interesting," Duke said, checking his weapons with the habitual thoroughness of someone whose survival depended on equipment maintenance. "But I've survived worse. Hell, I've survived my Earth's bureaucracy. Compared to that, the 41st millennium is just another Tuesday with more demons." As they began preliminary work on reconstructing the dimensional anchor, incorporating Necron phase shift principles, Tau stabilization matrices, and Duke's own Dark Age knowledge, Duke couldn't shake the feeling that the hard part wasn't over. The trial had been politics. The reconstruction would be technical challenge. But actually activating the anchor and going home? That was when things would get truly dangerous. Because everyone, Imperial, Xenos, and Chaos, would want to see where the dimensional breach led, and some of them would want to follow Duke through. "Just another Tuesday," Duke muttered again, rewiring quantum entanglement matrices. "Just another crazy, politically complicated, dimensionally dangerous Tuesday." The Eldar arrived without warning, which Duke was learning was standard operating procedure for every faction in the 41st millennium. One moment, the laboratory was secure. Ultramarines on perimeter, Necron portal monitored, tech priests working on the dimensional anchor's reconstruction. The next moment, reality folded in a way that made Duke's tactical hoodie crash, trying to process the geometry, and 5 figures materialized as if they'd been there all along, and everyone had simply forgotten to notice. They were tall, taller than humans, slender to the point of seeming fragile, wearing armor that incorporated flowing robes in a style that suggested fashion and function weren't mutually exclusive concepts. Their helmets were works of art, each one unique, and when they removed them, Duke got his first look at faces that were simultaneously beautiful and alien. Too perfect to be human, ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Gaius had his bolter raised before Duke could blink. "Eldar, Xenos detected. All units, stand down," Duke ordered, his hand on Gaius's armored forearm. "Let's hear what they want before we start shooting. We've managed not to kill the last 3 alien species that showed up. Let's keep the streak going." The leader, a woman whose presence radiated psychic pressure Duke's nervous system registered as danger mixed with profound weariness, stepped forward. She wore armor in shades of bone and midnight, and her movements suggested she existed slightly out of phase with normal time. "I am Farseer Eldaril of Craftworld Ulthwé," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that bypassed ears and spoke directly to consciousness. "We have been watching you, Duke Nukem of the Dark Age. watching as you stumbled through dimensions, collaborated with lesser species, and built your anchor to escape this era. Her eyes, completely black, no whites visible, focused on him with unnerving intensity. And we have foreseen what happens if you activate that device. Catastrophe, collapse, the death of hope itself. Duke lowered his weapons slightly but kept them ready. That's quite an opening. Usually people work up to apocalyptic warnings. You want to elaborate on what catastrophe we're talking about? Eldoril gestured, and hololithic projections materialized around them. Not crude Imperial holo projectors, but constructs woven from psychic energy and light. They showed the dimensional anchor, its activation sequence, and something Duke hadn't anticipated. A vast network of tunnels through reality itself, connecting thousands of worlds, pulsing with ancient energy. The webway, Eldoril explained. Our ancestors' greatest achievement, a dimensional network that allows travel without touching the warp's corruption. It is thousands of years older than your species' civilization, maintained through psychic architecture and reality manipulation beyond your comprehension. Her expression hardened, and your dimensional anchor will tear through it like a bullet through ancient glass. Duke studied the projections, his engineering knowledge parsing the relationship between his anchor's dimensional penetration and the webway's structure. The math was complicated, but the conclusion was clear. The frequencies his anchor used to punch through dimensional barriers would resonate catastrophically with the webway's construction. How bad are we talking? Duke asked. Total structural collapse of the webway network in this sector, Eldoril replied. Thousands of passages sealed, dozens of craft worlds cut off from each other, and worst of all, she pulled up a new projection showing something that looked like a wound in reality. The breach would destabilize the barriers containing she who thirsts. Slaanesh would have direct access to real space in ways even the Great Rift doesn't permit. Duke's threat assessment crystallized. Using the anchor as designed would accidentally free the Chaos God who'd literally eaten most of the Eldar species' souls. That was impressively bad, even by his standards. Okay, Duke admitted. That's a problem. So what's your proposed solution? I'm guessing you didn't show up just to tell me I can't go home. We propose cooperation, Eldoril said. Eldar bone singers, our reality sculptors, can modify your anchor. Adjust its dimensional frequencies to avoid webway resonance. The device will still function, but safely. You return home, the webway survives, Slaanesh remains partially contained. It sounded reasonable, which immediately made Duke suspicious. What's the catch? Eldoril's expression suggested she'd expected the question. The modifications require you to understand webway architecture, which means we must teach you principles the Eldar have guarded for millennia. Knowledge that could revolutionize human dimensional travel, potentially allowing the Imperium to construct their own webway equivalent networks. Her tone carried ancient bitterness. Knowledge we would never share under normal circumstances. But you're sharing it now because the alternative is worse, Duke concluded. Precisely, Eldoril confirmed. We Eldar are pragmatists, despite our reputation. We have survived the fall, the birth of Slaanesh, and 10,000 years of slow extinction through ruthless adaptation. If sharing knowledge with a human prevents greater catastrophe, we will share knowledge. She paused. But understand, this is not altruism. We do this because we must, and we will be watching to ensure your species does not weaponize what we teach you. Duke looked at the assembled parties, Ultramarines who'd probably been taught to shoot Eldar on sight, Archmagos Hephaestion, whose sensors were recording everything, Necron Technomancer Arxakis, whose tomb world had its own dimensional technology, and now Eldar Farseers offering forbidden knowledge to prevent apocalypse. His life had gotten really complicated. All right, Duke said. I'll work with your bone singers. But we do this transparently. Everyone here gets to observe and learn. Mechanicus, Necrons, Tau. If they want to send representatives, If we're preventing apocalypse, might as well use it as teaching opportunity." The reaction was immediate and varied. Eldaril looked horrified at the prospect of sharing Eldar secrets with lesser species. Arxakis's optical sensors brightened with acquisitive interest. Hephaestion's mechadendrites practically vibrated with excitement. And Gaius just sighed with the exhausted patience of someone who'd stopped being surprised by Duke's decisions. "You cannot be serious," Eldaril protested. "You would share webway principles with Xenos and the Imperium simultaneously. The political implications alone—" "Are your problem, not mine," Duke interrupted. "I'm not playing faction politics. I'm building a dimensional anchor that doesn't accidentally free Chaos gods. If that requires everyone learning webway architecture, then everyone learns. Take it or leave it." Eldaril stared at him for a long moment, her ancient eyes trying to parse whether Duke was insane, brilliant, or some combination thereof. Finally, she performed a gesture that might have been respectful acknowledgement or suppressed homicidal rage. Duke couldn't quite tell. "Very well," Eldaril agreed. "We will teach openly. But know this, human. If your species weaponizes this knowledge against the Eldar, we will hold you personally responsible. And Eldar memory spans millennia. We do not forget debts or betrayals." "Fair enough," Duke said. "But here's the thing. I'm from an era before humans and Eldar were enemies. Before your fall, before the Imperium, when our species occasionally traded instead of fighting. So maybe, just maybe, this is a chance to remember we don't have to be enemies." "Your optimism is touching," Eldaril said, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. "But the galaxy is not kind to optimists. The fall taught us that lesson in blood and souls." Over the next week, Duke's laboratory became the strangest classroom in Imperial history. Eldar bone singers, psychic artisans who could literally sculpt reality, demonstrated webway construction principles, while Mechanicus, tech priests, recorded everything with religious fervor. Necron cryptechs offered their own dimensional insights from the War in Heaven era. Tau engineers provided technical translations between wildly different knowledge systems. And Duke stood at the center, synthesizing everything into a modified anchor design that wouldn't destroy the galaxy. The collaboration was tense, often hostile, and occasionally broke down into arguments that required Duke to physically intervene before species-wide grudges led to violence. But slowly, impossibly, the anchor took shape. A hybrid device incorporating human Dark Age technology, Necron phase shift matrices, Tau stabilization systems, and Eldar webway principles. It was the most sophisticated dimensional manipulation device the galaxy had seen since the War in Heaven. "This is unprecedented," Hephaestion observed, his mechadendrites caressing components that represented 5 different technological paradigms working in harmony. A device built through genuine multi-species cooperation. The Omnissiah's wisdom manifest through collaboration rather than conquest. "Do not romanticize this," Eldaril warned. "We cooperate because we must, not because we desire peace. When this crisis ends, our species will return to their ancient conflicts." "Maybe," Duke said, making final adjustments to the quantum entanglement matrix. "Or maybe you'll remember that working together achieved what none of you could do alone." Crazy thought, I know, but it's worked for me before. As the anchor neared completion, Duke noticed something troubling. The various factions weren't just learning dimensional theory, they were learning how to replicate the anchor. The Mechanicus was already designing Imperial versions. The Necrons were calculating applications for biotransference reversal. The Eldar were considering webway expansion using modified principles. Even the Tau were planning greater good applications. Duke had accidentally started an interdimensional arms race. "You realize what you've done?" Gaius asked privately, watching the various factions work. "You've given every major power in the galaxy the tools to fundamentally alter reality. The consequences will ripple for millennia." "Yeah," Duke admitted. "But the alternative was letting my anchor accidentally free Slaanesh. Lesser of 2 evils, right?" I'm uncertain whether teaching Necrons, Eldar, and the Imperium how to manipulate dimensions qualifies as lesser evil," Gaius replied. "But perhaps that is your legacy, forcing the galaxy to evolve or die trying." On the day the anchor was finally ready for activation, every faction that had contributed sent representatives to observe. The laboratory was crowded with Ultramarines, Tech priests, Necron warriors, Tau diplomats, and Eldar seers, all watching the device that had consumed months of work and forced cooperation between species who'd been killing each other for millennia. Duke stood at the anchor's control interface, his finger hovering over the activation sequence. One press, and he'd go home. Back to his Earth, his time, his universe, where the biggest problems were alien invasions that could be solved with sufficient firepower and attitude. But something gnawed at him. A question that had been building since Cadia, since the Inquisitorial trial, since he'd started teaching Tech priests and inspiring guardsmen and proving that humans could be better than the Imperium made them. Was leaving the right choice? "Duke," Hephaestion said quietly. "The anchor is ready. All safety protocols engaged. Webway interference eliminated. You can go home." Duke's hand remained frozen over the controls. "What are you waiting for?" Cryptoman asked, having arrived to witness the departure. "You've earned this. You've survived the 41st millennium, shared your knowledge, and now you get to escape. Take the win." "I'm thinking," Duke replied. "About what?" Eldoril asked, her Farseer abilities probably already knowing the answer. Duke looked around the laboratory. At Gaius, who'd protected him despite doctrine saying Xenos collaborators should be executed. At Hephaestion, who'd risked tech heresy charges to learn genuine engineering. At Cryptoman, who defied the Inquisition to prove pragmatism could work. At Arxarchus, an ancient death robot who'd rediscovered hope through cooperation. At Eldoril, who'd shared secrets to prevent catastrophe. "I'm thinking," Duke said slowly, "that I came to this universe planning to leave. But I've changed things here. Started movements, planted seeds. And if I leave, those seeds might get burned out by the Imperium's orthodoxy before they can grow." "You cannot stay," Covenant said, having also arrived to ensure Duke fulfilled his obligation to leave. "Your conditional sanction explicitly requires your departure once the anchor is functional. The Inquisition will not tolerate your continued presence breeding further heresy." "I know," Duke said, "but..." An alarm shrieked through the laboratory. Not a mechanical alarm, something deeper, more fundamental. Reality itself was screaming. Duke's tactical HUD lit up with warnings. Massive warp breach detected, multiple demon manifestations, chaos fleet emerging from Immaterium, and targeting solutions locked directly on Stygi's Aoti. "It's Abaddon," Gaius reported, his Vox connecting to orbital defenses. "The Despoiler himself. He's launching assault on the Forge world, entire Black Crusade war fleet. They must have learned about the anchor." Through the laboratory's viewports, Duke watched the sky burn as chaos forces tore through Stygi's Thiki's orbital defenses. Drop pods rained toward the surface, each one carrying Chaos Marines who'd spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of slaughter. "They want the anchor," Eldoril stated. "They want dimensional technology that could let chaos invade any universe, including yours, Duke Nukem. If they capture the anchor, nowhere is safe." Duke looked at the activation controls. He could leave right now, jump through the portal, return home, and let the 41st millennium deal with its own problems. But if he left, chaos would capture the anchor, reverse engineer it, use it to spread corruption across dimensional barriers into universes that had never known chaos existed, including his Earth. The choice crystallized with painful clarity. Duke stepped away from the activation controls, his decision made. "Change of plans. We're not running." "What?" Cryptman exclaimed. "Duke, you can escape. You can go home. Why would you..." "Because if I leave now, chaos gets the anchor," Duke interrupted, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. And if Chaos learns how to jump dimensions, my Earth isn't safe. Nobody's safe. So we're going to do what I do best. Defend this position, kill the bad guys, and save the day. Gaius's helmeted head turned toward Duke. You are choosing to stay, to fight, despite having earned your escape. Temporarily, Duke clarified. I'm not giving up on going home, but I'm not leaving that door open for demons to follow me through either. We secure the anchor, drive off Abaddon's forces, then I go home. In that order. The Eldar, Necrons, Tau, and assembled Imperial forces exchanged glances that transcended species barriers, the universal recognition that someone had just volunteered for suicidal heroism. The Despoiler's forces number in the thousands, Eldril warned. Chaos Space Marines, cultists, demon engines, and possibly greater demons. Even with all our factions combined, we are outnumbered. Yeah, Duke agreed. But we've got something Abaddon doesn't expect. Actual cooperation instead of backstabbing and chaos infighting. Plus, we've got home field advantage, defensive positions, and me. Your confidence borders on delusion, Arxakis observed. Borders it? Duke grinned. I passed that border years ago and set up permanent residence on the other side. Now let's show these chaos bastards what happens when you threaten Duke Nukem's ride home. The battle plan came together with surprising speed. Gaius coordinated ultramarine defensive positions. Hephaestion mobilized Skitarii, Mechanicus warrior servitors, Eldril's aspect. Warriors took strategic locations. Necron forces established overlapping fields of fire. Tau battlesuits deployed for maximum firepower concentration. And Duke took position at the laboratory's center, the dimensional anchor at his back, every weapon loaded and ready. The first wave hit like a tsunami of corruption. Chaos cultists poured through breached forge walls, screaming hymns to dark gods. Behind them came Chaos Marines in defiled power armor, their weapons spitting warp fire and blessed ammunition. And towering over everything, demon engines that walked on spider legs and sprouted cannons that fired reality-warping shells. Duke's Devastator roared to life, cutting through cultists with mechanical precision. The Ultramarines' bolters added disciplined fire. Eldar shuriken catapults wove patterns of monomolecular death. Necron Gorse weapons molecularly disintegrated targets. Tau pulse rifles burned through armor with plasma precision. It was the most coordinated multi-species defense the galaxy had witnessed since the war in heaven. For the Emperor, the Ultramarines roared. For the greater good, the Tau answered. For vengeance and restoration, the Necrons added. For the survival of the Elder, the Aspect warriors contributed. For going home and not letting demons ruin everything, Duke shouted. Because why break tradition now? A Chaos sorcerer emerged from the assault wave, staff raised, reality bending around him as he prepared to unleash demonic summons. Duke recognized the threat immediately. Let the sorcerer complete that spell, and demons would flood the battlefield. He activated his jetpack, soared over the front lines, and introduced the sorcerer to his shotgun at point-blank range. The traitor's head exploded in a spray of corrupted matter, and his summoning collapsed mid-manifestation. Target priority, Duke called out over Vox. Kill the sorcerers first. They're the ones enabling demon manifestations. The assembled forces adapted immediately, shifting fire to prioritize chaos sorcerers. The coordinated targeting proved devastatingly effective. Without sorcerers to maintain their presence, demons flickered and destabilized, reality rejecting their impossible existence. But the chaos forces kept coming, wave after wave, consuming their own dead to fuel dark rituals, using corpses as shields and sacrifices to power warp magic. This wasn't ordinary warfare. This was Chaos's infinite patience and resources grinding against finite defenders. We cannot hold indefinitely, Gaius reported, his armor showing damage from sustained combat. They will overwhelm us through attrition." "Then we don't fight indefinitely," Duke replied, a plan forming. "We fight long enough to turn the anchor into a weapon." Eldaril's eyes widened. "You cannot be suggesting—" "I'm absolutely suggesting," Duke confirmed. "We've built a device that can tear dimensional barriers. What if we point it at the Chaos Fleet? Open a dimensional breach directly under their ships?" "The energy discharge would be catastrophic," Hephaestion warned. "Possibly destroy the entire Forge complex." "Better than letting Chaos capture dimensional technology," Duke countered. "Arxakis, can Necron phase shift generators create a directional focus?" The ancient cryptech's optical sensors brightened. "Fascinating application. Yes, dimensional breach could be weaponized. Chaos vessels would be pulled into dimensional void. Probability of survival, 0.03%. "I'll take those odds," Duke said. "How long to modify the anchor?" 17 minutes, Arxakis calculated. "Then we hold for 17 minutes, Duke declared. "Everyone dig in, conserve ammunition, and prepare for the biggest screw you in dimensional warfare history." The next 17 minutes were the longest of Duke's life. Chaos forces threw everything at the laboratory complex. Berserkers frothing with rage, plague marines spreading corruption, noise marines weaponizing sound itself, and Thousand Suns dust warriors marching in precise formations. The defenders gave ground grudgingly, each meter purchased with blood and firepower. Duke was everywhere, jetpacking between positions, providing covering fire, deploying his last pipe bombs to collapse choke points, and generally making himself the most annoying target possible. His armor showed damage, his weapons were heating past safety tolerances, and his augmented physiology was burning through reserves faster than it could regenerate. But he kept fighting. 10 seconds, Arxakis announced. A massive figure emerged from the Chaos ranks. A demon prince, wings spread wide, wielding a sword that dripped reality poison. It spotted Duke, recognized him as the anchor's creator, and charged with speed that turned its form into a blur of corruption. Duke raised his Devastator, fired everything he had, watched the rounds impact and barely slow the demon. The prince's sword descended, promised death and eternal damnation. Gaius intercepted, his power sword meeting the demon blade in a shower of sparks. "Finish the weapon," the Ultramarine roared. "I'll hold." Duke ran, sprinted toward the anchor's controls, while behind him, Brother Sergeant Gaius fought a demon prince in single combat that would be recorded in Ultramarine's history for centuries. "Anchor ready," Arxakis declared. Duke's hand slammed down on the modified activation sequence. The dimensional anchor didn't open a doorway, it opened a wound. Reality tore above Stygies 8's orbit, directly beneath the Chaos Fleet. Ships that had survived 10,000 years of warfare suddenly found themselves facing the void between universes. Hulls designed to withstand warp immersion buckled under dimensional stress that physics couldn't compensate for. The entire Black Crusade war fleet began collapsing into the dimensional breach. "Retreat!" someone in the Chaos forces screamed. "Fall back! The anchor is—" The transmission cut off as the breach expanded, consuming ships, drop pods, and the psychic link that bound the Chaos assault together. Without coordination, the ground forces broke. Some tried to flee, others threw themselves at the defenders in suicidal last stands, and the smart ones simply surrendered. Within minutes, the battle was over. Duke stood amid the carnage, breathing hard, his weapons smoking. Around him, the multi-species defenders began lowering their weapons, processing the fact that they'd just survived Abaddon the Despoiler's assault through unprecedented cooperation. "Report," Duke croaked into Vox. Gaius limped over, his power armor catastrophically damaged, but the Space Marine still functional. Demon Prince banished, Chaos forces routed. The Despoiler's flagship escaped, but his war fleet is gone. Simply gone. consumed by your dimensional weapon. Casualties? Duke asked. Significant, Gaius admitted, but far fewer than if we'd fought conventionally. Your coordination saved thousands. Eldaril approached, her armor scorched, but her expression carrying something that might have been respect. You weaponized dimensional manipulation, turned scientific achievement into strategic asset. The Eldar will need to reconsider our assessment of human potential. The Necrons acknowledge your tactical brilliance, Arxakis added, and your willingness to risk personal escape for collective defense, rare qualities in any species. Cryptman emerged from a bunker where she'd been coordinating orbital responses, her expression carrying exhausted relief. Duke, you just saved Steige's fate. Possibly saved the sector. The Inquisition will have to acknowledge your value now. Duke looked at the dimensional anchor, modified, weaponized, proven effective. Then he looked at the people he'd fought alongside. Space Marines who'd learned to work with Xenos, Eldar who'd shared ancient secrets, Necrons who'd rediscovered purpose, Tau who'd witnessed human potential, and Mechanicus adepts who'd remembered how to truly understand technology. I can go home now, Duke said slowly. Recalibrate the anchor, activate it properly, and escape to my own time. He looked around at the assembled forces. But I'm wondering if I should. What? Multiple voices exclaimed simultaneously. Duke held up his hand. Hear me out. I came here planning to leave. But I've changed things. Started something. This battle. All these species working together, winning against impossible odds. That's proof the galaxy doesn't have to be endless, grim-dark conflict. Maybe my purpose here isn't to escape. Maybe it's to show everyone what cooperation can achieve. Duke, Hephaestion said carefully, your presence is destabilizing. Every moment you remain, Orthodox factions plot your execution. The Imperium cannot tolerate what you represent long-term. I know, Duke agreed, which is why I'm not staying permanently, but I'm not leaving yet either. He looked at the dimensional anchor. This device proves dimensional travel is possible. That means the Imperium could explore other realities, find resources, maybe even find allies. But they'll need someone who understands the technology, someone who can teach them without requiring religious devotion. You propose to become the Imperium's dimensional expert, Eldaril stated, training the species that once sought to exterminate all Xenos. Do you understand the risk? Yeah, Duke confirmed. But I also understand the alternative. If I leave, the Imperium continues its slow collapse. If I stay a while longer, maybe I can give them tools to survive. He grinned. Plus, I've gotten used to shooting demons. It's grown on me. Covenant emerged from another bunker, her ancient inquisitorial rosette glinting in the forge light. Duke Nukem, if you choose to remain, your conditional sanction will be reviewed. Extended, possibly, but the bargain remains. You work under inquisitorial oversight. You share knowledge through approved channels. You accept that your freedom is limited. For now, Duke agreed. But eventually I go home. That's non-negotiable. I just need more time to make sure I'm not leaving things worse than I found them. The various factions looked at each other. Ancient enemies forced into cooperation by one human's stubborn refusal to accept that progress was impossible. The Ultramarines will support this decision, Gaius declared. You have earned our chapter's respect. We will shield you from Orthodox persecution as long as you continue serving humanity's interests. The Necrons find this arrangement acceptable, Arxakis added. Your continued presence provides research opportunities, and your dimensional expertise may yet assist with biotransference reversal. The Tau Empire will maintain diplomatic contact, Por-El Kais said via Vox Link. You prove that humans can evolve beyond the Imperium's constraints. That serves the greater good. The Eldar will watch, Eldaril said carefully. But know this, you have demonstrated that cooperation is possible. That alone is worth preserving. We will not interfere with your work. Duke looked at the assembled forces. the strangest alliance the galaxy had seen in millennia, forged in battle and maintained through desperate necessity. It wasn't perfect. It probably wouldn't last. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. "All right," Duke said. "Let's make this official. I'm staying in the 41st millennium a while longer, not as a permanent resident, not as an Imperial subject, but as Duke Nukem, dimensional expert, professional alien killer, and the guy who proved humans can be better than their worst instincts." "That title needs work," Hephaestion observed. "Yeah, well, we'll workshop it," Duke replied. "Right now, I need medical attention, weapon repairs, and about 12 hours of sleep, in that order." As the various factions began securing the battlefield and coordinating cleanup operations, Duke found himself alone with a dimensional anchor, his ride home, his escape route, the device that could take him away from this nightmare future. But looking at it now, Duke realized something important. He didn't want to escape anymore. He wanted to fix things, or at least try, because running away wasn't in his nature, even when running away made sense. "I'll go home eventually," Duke promised the anchor. "When the job's done. When I've taught these people what they need to know. When I've proven that humanity can be great without requiring gods or emperors to show them how." The anchor hummed with dimensional energy, as if acknowledging the promise. "Just another Tuesday," Duke muttered, heading toward the medical bay. Except this Tuesday involves staying in hell by choice. Definitely the weirdest Tuesday yet. Duke Nukem's decision to remain in the 44th millennium, temporarily, he insisted, always temporarily, became a turning point in Imperial history. The Battle of Styges VIII entered legend, the day humans, Eldar, Necrons, and Tau fought together against Chaos and won. When news spread across the Imperium, reactions varied from horror to hope, but nobody could deny the results. The Roughnecks on Cadia continued spreading Duke's combat doctrines, creating a quiet revolution in Astra Militarum tactics. Magos Kern's tech priests taught understanding disguised as deeper devotion, slowly transforming the cult Mechanicus from within. Inquisitor Cryptman's radical faction gained credibility as Duke's pragmatic cooperation proved more effective than orthodox dogma. And across a million worlds, people began whispering that maybe, just maybe, the Imperium didn't have to be eternal grimness and suffering. Duke spent the following years as the galaxy's most unusual consultant, teaching dimensional theory to Mechanicus adepts, coordinating with the Xenos when necessary, defending Forge worlds from chaos incursions, and generally making orthodox Imperials uncomfortable with his continued existence. The dimensional anchor remained in his possession, always ready for the day he'd finally decide the job was done and go home. That day would come, eventually. Duke knew it in his bones. He was from Earth's past, not the Imperium's future, and he'd return to where he belonged. But not yet. Because somewhere along the way, Duke Nukem had discovered something important. Being the hero wasn't about always winning or never facing consequences. It was about showing up, doing the work, and proving that impossible situations could be overcome through competence, cooperation, and refusing to accept that failure was inevitable. The 41st millennium was still brutal. The Imperium was still tyrannical. Chaos still threatened everything. But in laboratories across Forge worlds, tech priests were learning to understand rather than worship. In training yards across Fortress worlds, soldiers were learning Duke's tactics, and in chambers across inquisitorial stations, even Orthodox members were forced to acknowledge that pragmatic cooperation achieved results that faith alone could not. Duke Nukem hadn't saved the Imperium. He'd done something potentially more dangerous. He'd shown them they could save themselves. Whether that knowledge would lead to the Imperium's salvation or its destruction remained to be seen. But Duke figured that wasn't his problem to solve alone. He'd planted the seeds, given them the tools, and demonstrated what was possible. The rest was up to them. As Duke stood on Steige's 8th observation deck one night, watching the Forge world's endless industry grind forward, he thought about his Earth, his time, his universe where the worst problems could be solved with enough guns and attitude. "I'll come home," he promised the stars. "When the work's done. When I've taught them everything I can. When I'm sure leaving won't make things worse." His reflection in the viewport grinned back, scarred, older than when he'd arrived, but still unmistakably Duke Nukem. Still the guy who'd saved Earth a dozen times, and now found himself trying to save an entire galaxy. "Hail to the king, baby," Duke said to his reflection. Still kicking, still fighting, still refusing to let the bastards win. And somewhere in the depths of Steige's sight, the dimensional anchor hummed with potential energy, waiting patiently for the day its creator would finally activate it properly and go home. That day would come. Just not today.